Good evening, everyone. This Tuesday, April 1st, 2025 meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck.
Here.
Councilors Mboot.
Here.
Wendland.
Here.
Burdick.
Here.
Corrigan.
Here.
Rath. And Afghan.
Here.
Thank you very much. Now, everyone, you please stand and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God. All right. We have some proclamations. And the first is Child Abuse Prevention Month. And this proclamation will be posted to the city website. The next proclamation is, and that's for the whole month, Child Abuse Prevention Month. And then we have National Library Week, which is April 6th, next week, April 6th through the 12th. Our residents in Lake Oswego have a long history of strong support for public libraries, library workers, and library volunteerism, including the Lake Oswego Reads program, which is taking place right now. Library supporters and advocates across the nation are joining together to celebrate National Library Week, April 6th through 12th, as I mentioned. During this week, we encourage all residents to visit their library, explore its resources, engage with its events, and celebrate all the ways the library draws us together as a community. We will have the National Library Week proclamation signed and posted to the website, and we give special thanks to our library team and all the folks who volunteer and spend their time at the library as well. And April 22nd is Earth Day, which is celebrated around the world, global day of awareness for the mobilization of environmental protection. And the city of Lake Oswego is celebrating Earth Day this month by reaffirming our commitment to being good stewards of the environment, reducing our contributions to climate change, and fostering a healthy, resilient, and sustainable community. There's a theme to this year's Earth Day, and it is Our Power, Our Planet, highlighting the need to transition to clean, renewable energy to reduce air pollution, create jobs, and drive economic growth and combat climate change. I heard we're going to designate even more parking spots EV only. No. That's a joke. John, stop paying attention. Seeing who's awake. All the spots. This year, in celebration of Earth Day, we're partnering again with the Lake Oswego School District, Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, Oswego Lake Watershed Council, and the city's Sustainability Advisory Board to hold forth the annual Lake Oswego Sustainability Resource Fair, and that is actually happening this Sunday, April 6th from 11 to 2 at River Grove Elementary, and that is a great event. You can learn there about clean energy options and much more. Worthwhile stopping by. This proclamation will also be signed and posted to the city website. And next we have time on the agenda for public comment. I don't think we have anyone here for public comment or online. Okay. Now we're going to move on to the consent agenda. We have item 6.1, it's a facility use agreement with Raw Honey for honeybees at Lesher Farm. Item 6.2 is an ordinance 2957. This is annexing to the city one parcel. It's 0.23 acres at 16523 Bonaire Avenue. It's declaring City of Lake Oswego zoning of R75 pursuant to LOC Chapter 50.01.0045 and removing the territory from certain districts. We have item 6.3, which is AP 24-05. This adopts our findings, conclusions, and orders for the tree removal item. That was TR 499-24001007 tree. That was the appeal of the Development Review Commission's decision to approve the permit to remove one 18-inch western hemlock at 233E Avenue. And then finally, item 6.4, which is resolution 25-08. This is a resolution of the City Council creating an ad hoc tree task force related there to one of our council goals. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, motion made by Councilor Boop and seconded by Councilor Burdick. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes 7-0. And then we have for the councilors only, resolution 25-15. It's a resolution of the city councilors of the city approving an appointment of an alternate to the Planning Commission. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 25-15?
I move to adopt Resolution 2515.
Second.
All right, motion is made by Councilor Corrigan, seconded by Councilor Burdick. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and I abstain. That motion passes 6-0. And now moving on to our first item of council business, we have the consideration of Ordinance 2960. This is again related to a council goal, an ordinance of the City Council amending the code to redefine the 50+ Advisory Board as the Community Health and Resiliency Advisory Board. And joining us, we have Ms. Bigelow, the Adult Community Center Manager, and Mr. Bruner from the City Manager's Office. Good to have you both here. Good evening.
For the council. Thank you for having us here today. I'm Maria Bigelow, the Center Manager for the Adult Community Center, and with me is Quinn Bruner, an analyst in the City Manager's Office. We have a really quick 5-minute presentation on one of the 2025 City Council initiatives, the initiative to redefine the 50+ Advisory Board as the Community Health and Resiliency Advisory Board. This initiative was adopted in January of 2025, and staff took quick action to develop a preliminary, high-level 4-pronged charge statement for the new board. The preliminary charge statement is listed for you on your screen. And the summary of the charge statement is really the board's focus is to advise City Council on emergency preparedness and community health education. The anticipated next steps of the board is to, 1, be recruited and developed, have a meeting, and revisit the charge statement. And if there are substantial changes to it, we'll give you updates. The board will consist of 9 members, 2 of which will be youth members, and anyone currently serving on the 50+ Advisory Board can continue their term on the Community Health and Resiliency Advisory Board. And now Quinn will provide some more updates on recruitment.
Thank you, Maria. As Manager Bigelow said, we will be recruiting 4 members of the Community Health and Resiliency Advisory Board through our annual Boards and Commissions recruitment process. We have, I believe, 6 seats that we will be aiming to fill through this process, including 2 alternates. And we, this is just also a friendly reminder that recruitment for all of our boards and commissions opened yesterday and will be running through May 11th. So tomorrow you will have recruitment toolkits in all of your inboxes, and we encourage you to send out materials to anybody in your network who you think would be a good fit for the new Community Health and Resiliency Advisory Board or any of our others. And that's what we've got on the recruitment front.
Any questions?
Does anyone have any questions? Nothing? Does it sound good? My only comment, I appreciate all the work putting this forward. This is very exciting. Talked to some members of the 50+ Advisory Board who are also very excited about this change. I wondered if, like wordsmith things, you know, you all put it together so nicely. We look at the charge of the group. We have, it all looks really good. But it was the advice of councils how to promote healthy, you know, lifestyle options, and I thought maybe that was a little narrow. And it maybe, and it, I don't want to wordsmith, but something that just incorporates, you know, more holistic, physical, kind of mental, behavioral welfare, not just, you know, lifestyle. Kind of that kind of more relates to the public health work we've been doing with the county a little bit, you know, connecting that. So it's kind of all that.
That makes perfect sense to me. If the proposed course of action that I would recommend would be adopting this preliminary charge here so that we can begin recruiting for this board today. And then by the end of the year, when we come back for our annual code cleanup, we could incorporate a revised charge statement that includes that amendment as well as any others that may be recommended by the newly appointed members of the board when they have a chance to form and deliberate about the ways they can most meaningfully advance the work that you've charged them with.
Okay, yeah, I think that sounds great. Someone like to make a motion approving this ordinance?
Mr. Mayor, as the liaison to the 50+ Advisory Board, sunsetting this board, I'm hoping that I qualify for unemployment. I would like to move to enact Ordinance 2960.
Second.
All right, the motion has been made by Councilor Afghan, seconded by Councilor Mboop. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes 7-0. Thank you both so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it.
So you have.
Now we have a couple study sessions tonight. The first one, this is item 10.1. It's a study session on the enforcement of right-of-way and vegetation management. And joining us, we have Director Rooney, our city engineer, and Mr. Ryan. Good to have you both here.
Thank you.
Get our seats.
Even.
Right over there. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. I'm Erica Rooney, Public Works Director and City Engineer. Thank you for having us here tonight. As mentioned, our item number 10.1 is titled Enforcement of the Right-of-Way and Vegetation Program. And I want to start off by just a little bit of background before I have Lucas Ryan give the presentation. So this is a complement, if you will, to a code enforcement presentation that was provided by the Planning Department back in June of last year. It's been a while, and a lot has happened since then. But they came in and talked to you about their code enforcement program, you know, things like fences in the right-of-way or fences are too tall, things like that, planning and building, mostly planning-related code enforcement issues. Fairly extensive presentation. And then the supplement to that was to be, what do we do in the right-of-way? Because that's a whole nother story, right? Different code, although part of the municipal code, it's different chapters and things like that. So what happened at that time is that we had a vacancy, a permit technician vacancy that we were in the process of filling, and it was filled by this man here, Lucas Ryan, who started with us back in late June. Yeah, right before July 1, just a couple days before. And we got him started on a kind of a different path than we had done in the past. So I've been here 16 years, and we've always done something about enforcement of the right-of-way, but it's almost always been complaint-driven. It hasn't been a proactive approach where we say we're going to purposefully go out and look for violations in the right-of-way or look on certain corridors or address these things. So we decided with a new person, with some new vigor, we were going to try a more proactive approach to managing vegetation in particular in the right-of-way as it applies to impeding sidewalks or impeding pathways or sight distance that we call it when you're at an intersection and you can't see around the bushes because they're out too far, that sort of thing. So he has done an amazing job the last 6-7 months, whatever it's been. Where are we now? April 1st, my gosh. 7 months worth of work, learning other aspects of his job, but also developing this proactive approach. And with that, that's why we took a bit of a pause to come to you. We didn't come right after planning because we needed to get some of this up and running so that we could tell a little bit more about our story of what it takes to enforce the right-of-way and all of the things that people put in the right-of-way, both legally and illegally. And so that's what we're going to do tonight is supplement the report that we provided, which is really extensive because nothing's easy. Managing the right-of-way is complicated and there's a lot of things to consider. So what we're going to do tonight is supplement that with examples and pictures that I think will help tell the story of what we're up against, both the complaints we get and also through the proactive approach that we take when we go down a corridor and we see these things. How are we managing that? So with that, I don't know if you've seen Lucas out there on the, walk on the streets of Lake Oswego, as they say, but he has been out there doing an amazing job. I won't even ask him how many steps he's gotten in on some days. It should have counted. It would have been a lot and has been. And but this is his first time in front of council, so welcome him and let's present to you tonight our enforcement program for the right-of-way. And then at the end, we'd like to get some feedback on some suggestions if you have any. Should we change? Should we not change? So it's an open dialogue, and we're open to that feedback. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lucas.
Thank you, Director Rooney, and thank you, Council and Mayor Buck for having us in to discuss this. So I just wanted to start by giving you a brief overview of what we hope to go through today, starting with kind of the purpose, the overall purpose of enforcing the right-of-way. And then we'll talk about the overview of the applicable code, so the code that we're referencing directly to uphold some of these mailers that we send out. Common examples of the type of code violations that we see in the right-of-way. There's two that are, I would say, the most prominent, and so we'll share those. And then most of the time on this presentation is going to share on some in-field case studies of some of the sites that we've seen. And then we'll provide a comparison of kind of the enforcement practices by different departments. And then hope to have some discussion and questions. Please ask some questions along the way, but not too many, right? No. Okay, so first, the purpose of the right-of-way enforcement. I know that just last week, there was some discussion on right-of-way specific to like underground utilities, but right-of-way is also home to our roads and our pathways. And so we want to ensure that there's safe access to the city public right-of-way, and that access being for pedestrians, cyclists, other wheeled travelers, and vehicles, as well as access for our utility partners. So we want, as a vegetation and right-of-way management program, to provide the community with a responsive and effective way to address hazards and concerns related to right-of-way accessibility. Additionally, of note, I would say there's a lot of existing infrastructure, older sidewalks, older pathways, and so we want to maximize the existing infrastructure and ensure that it doesn't get overlooked. Even if it is old, we should continue to maintain access to those vital pathways. And sorry, I'm starting with some blocks of text, but I promise we'll show some great pictures to tell this story too. But I wanted to first start just by showing snippets of the sections of code that we defer to, paying specific attention to the boldface here. So Chapter 34, which is used frequently by the code enforcement team, when we're looking at pathways, improved pathways and sidewalks, as well as our roadways, essentially any type of projection of vegetation that might obstruct that path is an item that we want to enforce. And then Chapter 42 is the chapter for engineering, and this is a requirement that if someone was to place something in the right-of-way, they do need to obtain a permit for the placement of that permanent object. Obviously, there's a lot of exceptions to that depending on the type of thing that's going on the right-of-way, but in short, things like hedges are not allowed to be placed in the right-of-way, as well as like large boulders or landscaping materials. And so next is sight distance, so obscuration from view. This is most noticeable at intersections. And so basically anywhere that there's an intersection, be that an end of a roadway that tees with another roadway, there's a requirement that a sight triangle be maintained. And this is falls to the adjacent property owners to maintain that sight distance for the safe passageway of vehicles, as well as pedestrians to see around those corners. And so all of this code, really what it points to is the responsibility of the adjacent property owner to maintain that area, the right-of-way that's adjacent to their property. There are some cases around the city where Public Works staff does maintain certain corridors, as well as critical areas like stop signs if something needs to be trimmed right away. But generally speaking, it does fall to the adjacent property owner. And so here's a quick example of a physical obstruction. And so this is kind of a snapshot of what I might provide by letter to a property owner. This one's pretty easy to note. This is on Bryant, but it's at the back of Lake Haven Drive. And so this property owner may not frequently use this pathway, let alone know that it might be their responsibility to maintain it. And so there's a few different lines here that we look at to ensure that this property be back into compliance. And it's that the full width of the sidewalk is available, and that the height of that hedge or bush is not below 9 feet, as to allow passage by a pedestrian or two pedestrians passing on the sidewalk. And then the height of 13 feet over a road surface. The next one is that site distance obscuration. So this is what the site triangle. This example is at the end of Goodall Road as you turn onto Country Club. And as you're looking left, the distance that I take this photo is 14.5 feet, which comes from AASHTO National Transportation Standards. And so the sight line is, this picture is sent to the property owner, and I try my best to kind of annotate what needs removed. A lot of these particular properties with sight distance often result in communication back and forth with that property owner. Okay, so now I'm going to go through some quick examples here. The first one is at West Bay and Bryant. And so the before picture on the left, you can see there's a bush here, and then the after picture on the right is the result of us communicating with that property owner, requesting that that sight line be opened.
And they sold their house.
Yes, so it is redeveloping. That bush might very well be gone after they redevelop that house, but.
But you can see, this is a great picture because he's almost in exactly the same spot in both pictures. You can't see far enough with that first shot, but with the second one,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
much
big
further.
difference.
Good improvement.
And so the next one on Furnace Street, sorry, here's the map here. This is on the back of the river bend on the Willamette condos. And this property, this portion of the property is not within the kind of everyday use of the homeowners down at the condominiums. And so this particular one, Public Works staff did contract with landscaping to go get that removed. And then, sorry?
We did on this one, yes. There was this, and can you roll back one more just for 30? So as you can see, this isn't, some of these places where they have big tracts of land and they're not fronting it, there's some debate about whether or not it's their responsibility or not. Even though the code says it is, some of these places we have chosen to fix because we need them to be fixed well. We'll show you cases where we ask people, they trim 2 inches, they don't trim 2 feet, and it's a constant reoccurring problem. This one was significant enough. I mean, you couldn't even see, the guardrail had been completely obscured. It was impeding the ability to park, and you all know there's a high demand for parking down here because it's real close to George Rogers Park, so in the summertime. So it was a big enough job that we felt we would take this on. But technically, it was the adjacent property owner's responsibility. And we...
Equitably. And I totally get it.
Yes.
I get what you're saying, but I mean, do we charge that property owner or?
No, and that's part of the discussion to have a little later on. Should we reconsider the way we're doing things? Because technically, according to the code, we shouldn't be doing any of the right-of-way clearing unless it's our property. This example is private property impeding significantly. We chose to take care of this one. We have other examples, which I don't think we have the map, and it's part of the discussion is we want clarity because there is some equity conversation about it. Why did we choose to do this one? Why did we choose to do South Shore that we've been doing for 15 years? Why have we, or longer, excuse me, why are we doing part of a Stafford and McVeigh? Because they're perennial problems. And that's part of the conversation. We want to know and get direction from council on if you want us to change that or not.
Yep.
Yeah, you're
How
right.
much did work like this cost us?
I'm going to guess it was probably around, because I think we hired a contractor for this,
Yeah,
right?
it was
I don't know the exact number, but it was only a day's worth of work.
A day's worth of work for, okay. Like
So-
a few thousand.
18
dollars?
Probably 5.
5,000
But I
bucks.
don't know for sure. I could get that for you if you need
Okay,
it.
I'm just curious.
It wasn't, I can remember thinking, let's just do this and get it done because it was a lot. And
But
it
it's a
seemed
lot of
like it-
deferred, 5,000 that,
Yeah,
now it's
yeah.
done.
I'll check on the price though.
Okay, so then,
Director
I'm sorry, go
Rooney,
ahead.
and,
Yes.
I don't know if the city manager told you, I live in that neighborhood, and I gave you guys a compliment for getting that job done because it removes so much safety concerns with people who come and use the George Rogers Park. And because of this extrusion, they park further into the road, and this pushed everything back, so they park closer to the barrier and
Yes.
opens up the street.
Yes, yes.
So-
Thank you.
Okay, so for our next example, this was is a case where the hedge has not been removed. From my research, it looks like it's been in existence prior to 2007. This is at 6 Point on the corner around Bayberry and C Avenue. And so there's the hedge circled, and then you can see the property line indicated in black there. So this hedge has been meticulously maintained, I would say, at its current state since about 2007, or at least one street viewer could show us some photos there. So the stop sign is visible on C Avenue. So from assessing the situation, it doesn't really appear that it's causing any major obstructions for vehicular traffic. But of note is this crosswalk here that kind of goes right into the hedge. So if a pedestrian were to potentially use this area, then there may be some interference with vehicles and pedestrians there. But again, this was one that's well in the right-of-way, but there's been no removal of that hedge at this time. And so the next one is on Berwick. And so this came to us as a complaint from the Evergreen Neighborhood Association, and they really wanted us to particularly focus on Berwick, but I'll be going through to kind of assess various places around that neighborhood. And this one, if you're turning off of Berwick Court left on or right onto Berwick Road, there's a hedge that's creating sightline issues, as well as some impeding on Berwick Road itself. This area is frequently walked. There's no improved sidewalks there, so pedestrians, if they were using this corridor, again, they're kind of competing with cars there, and the cars cannot actually use the full width of that travel lane if there were two that were coming down that street. A similar one is on Upper, which I think everyone's probably seen this one at some point. It's at the end of, I'm sorry, not the end of Upper, but the intersection of Upper and, what was that?
Bryant.
And Bryant. And so this is the before picture here, and the red line is an approximate of the property line. And even in the small city cars, your mirrors kind of hit on this hedge if another car is on that roadway. Here's the after. They did a great job of trimming it beyond the edge of pavement, which was our request. However, the hedge is still in the right-of-way, and this is a property that has received communication several times in the last several years. And so it's a reoccurring issue and continues to take staff time to communicate and find the property owner to make sure that they're making these adjustments.
Lucas, what on that Berwick, going back to that Berwick, so the Berwick Road case study, what is the dilemma on that one there?
Did you see out in Berwick, Maribel?
Yeah,
It's the bushes are encroaching to where, like, if you were a pedestrian, you'd have to, there's nowhere to walk.
right, but this is one we haven't addressed.
I'm sorry, I should have noted that. So I did send a letter just this week to the property owners on this one. Yeah, I'm sorry, I was comparing it to that previous one, but this one, those property owners have been informed.
Oh, okay. So it could be trimmed back, just like the upper drive example. you provided.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Gotcha, okay.
And so we give 30 days, so I'd like to do a reassessment in about 30 days to see if they've made that request.
It's an example of, it's just a classic example of what we deal with, yeah.
Yeah, okay, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so another one here is 4th Street. This is kind of as you're approaching the library, if you're on the west side of 4th Street. So this is not one that I've communicated with the property owners. It's been an ongoing issue or an ongoing hedge that this property owner has received communication for requests that they make trim. There's only 2.5 feet of sidewalk width there. ADA standards is 4 feet. And so not only are they not meeting ADA, but they're not meeting code, which calls for the entire width of that sidewalk. The homeowner has shared that the hedge cannot withstand that much trimming.
But, yeah, you tell them.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
Like an obese.
yeah, yeah, yes. All right.
There was actually a comment in some of the discussion of them rerouting the sidewalk, but yeah, again, I'm just kind of leaving this open as a point of discussion. And so this is the last one, I think, and it's not a hedge. This one is actually boulders. And so this home was redeveloped in about 2022. And so that's about the time that these large rocks were placed in the right-of-way. Of note is that they also have a retaining wall there, which, to what I could find, they did not have a permit to construct that retaining wall. It is in the right-of-way, but it existed before this construction. And so my request to them was just to remove the boulders, and that did come out of a request from a public complaint.
Because when they would have redeveloped that property, they dedicated that gravel, the strip, right, as the exaction.
Probably in this
No,
area, they probably
already
didn't
did.
have to dedicate. They probably didn't have to
Already.
dedicate. My guess is that was already, the right-of-way was what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And they redid the house, and whether or not that, I can't remember if this wall went in with that house or not, but there's no permit. They didn't get an encroachment permit for it. So technically, the boulders, the hedge, and the wall are in violation of the code.
I see.
But we got part of it
Rocks.
dealt with, which was removing the rocks, at least, as you can see in that second picture on the right, opened it up a little bit for pedestrian continuity
Right.
on the shoulder.
So is there so if this wall had been here prior, in our general system, when we're permitting the new structure, that's not part of our, kind of looking at these encroachments and while they're building
Well,
the new house?
we could go deal with that too. That's part of it, is like, there are numerous examples like this where things have happened in the right-of-way without our permission. We have not generally gone after them if they aren't causing a problem. If they were to come in today to ask for a wall there, we would say no, push it back to the property line.
Right.
So we try to get that addressed when they come in or when they're redeveloping. I don't want to say we catch some of it, but we deal with it at that time.
Okay.
But oftentimes, the house is done being built, we walk away, we've closed out all of our permits, and then 2 months later, landscapers come in and do something different. That's very
Sure,
common.
I see. So do we have, I'm just, like, do we have kind of a system in place to try to catch some of the pre-existing non-compliance?
We have not yet.
Okay.
And we'll discuss a little bit of that during our alternatives discussion, Mayor Buck. So first, I just want to give a quick overview of compliance, comparing compliance and enforcement from other departments. And so I'll start with community development, with our code compliance staff. And so kind of in short, they essentially investigate to validate the existence of a compliance violation. And then they contact the property owner and/or the persons who performed that work and request compliance through education with the city code or state code or whatever is applicable for that. And then the violation letter is sent as well, communicating what that violation is. If there is no correction made within the requested timeline or the communication is not established for correction, what they do is they invoice a fee, which is in the master fees and charges through the building permitting system, ASELA. And I believe that they do this because it's a more streamlined method to invoice a fee than it is to go through a citation process. And then they can potentially earmark that money. And then if the fee is unpaid, then a citation might be provided following the standard municipal court procedure.
Can I ask a question? So the one example you had in first edition, C and 10, there were two violations there. One was the big rocks and one was the landscaping wall. I assume we told them about both violations, and I assume we told them the rocks have to go, but at this time, we're not enforcing the landscape wall. Are those assumptions correct?
Counselor, I may have to go back and check
Okay.
what the directive or direction was.
Okay.
But I do know that the request was only for the rocks at the time.
By the way, I like what you just told us, that the rocks are gone, so pedestrians can walk there. And yes, they have encroached into the right-of-way, but I don't see a need for enforcing that right now and asking them to move the wall back if it doesn't create a problem and if it doesn't change the neighborhood character. So in this case, as long as they know they have a violation, and at some point, we may go back to them and say, now is the time to move it, I think it makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, but then it gets to the situation where next door, they're gonna knock the house down and they're gonna build another house, and they're gonna go out another foot with their, I mean, it's kind of like trendsetters on the block, and that's kind of the hard part.
It is the
It's
hard part.
yeah.
It's the hard part.
So if you just ignore it, it just goes away, right?
Yeah, like you don't look, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So
No,
it-
honestly, I think we need to enforce clearly, like anyone who encroach on the thing, we ask for correction. If you don't, we go after you. They even go after councilors when they do it in their properties, in their schools when they build bridges that are not. So,
Councilors with schools.
yeah. Yeah, so, you know, for me, you are doing a wonderful work, but it has to be like, there's no exception. Like, that's, you know, administration has no face, no thing. This is what we're applying. You not following the code, you follow it.
How about you hold on, let them finish,
Yeah, well-
and then you guys are going to need to give us some
Okay.
direction.
Yeah, no, I was
I'm
just
sorry.
saying on this, on that.
Okay.
That's
board.
exactly what we will want to hear that feedback.
Okay,
You bet.
Can you just,
you should bring them
in your
all
staff report, you had you talked about the engineering fee on that previous page. Can you just talk a little bit about the difference between the community development code fee? I think it was on the previous slide.
Okay.
Yeah, versus this engineering that we lack, engineering fee.
Yes.
What would be the main difference there?
So currently, there is no fee in the engineering schedule for the master fees and charges to be able to assess a fee for a violation. And so that is one of the alternatives. I'll fast forward to that page real quick. Options that we're presenting today is that we set up a a fee in the master fee and charges to be able to send that fee to the violator in the event that there is no compliance or that we do not get compliance with a request.
So the community development fee, that does not include, you're not able to levy that on a right-of-way. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
I don't believe so,
Correct.
yeah.
The code for
Other stuff.
community development is set up in their code, and our code does not have that set up yet.
So these
And no
issues
master
we're
fees
talking
and
about here,
charges.
that's not even applicable to the issues we're talking about today.
No, we're just
Okay.
showing that they have a system where they go through a fee and a violation and citation to court.
You're kind of
And we
proposing something
stop
similar.
at education letters and begging.
Letters, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So,
The
Okay.
big club.
so if you will, I'll run through some of these proposed changes. So our current enforcement strategy is to send follow-up letters. Alternative one,
Mail them to death.
this was the one where we're looking at site redevelopment. And so if a property owner or a developer is to pull building permits, this is our time. Engineering does get the opportunity to review those permits. And if there are any encroachments at that time, we could place a condition on the building permit that those encroachments be removed as a condition of their building permit being released. I do believe there was a comment from Evan Boone that mentioned there may be a requirement for a revision to code for us to allow this alternative. But I can talk to him and planning staff to see what that might be. I think it would be a
You
change.
can't
in community
anymore.
development.
It was a nice idea.
Talk to him in our dreams.
No,
So
he
show
won't.
the next picture.
Yeah,
This
so
is an
this is
example,
this is an
right? Yeah,
example
here
where
we
this
go.
may come to fruition. This was a property on Lee Street. There's the property line in red, and this house just underwent a major alteration. The engineering staff did not place a condition for this hedge to be removed. There really wasn't a request or a complaint for it, and so this may be an opportunity in which we may request that encroachment be removed. A good example of this would be if they had a retaining wall or a fence, then we would ask them to remove that.
So
And
that
so-
whole thing is in
All of
public
it.
right away?
All of it and then some.
Including that.
Yeah, on the
swimming pool.
right-hand picture, you can see where the right-of-way line is, clear back over in the flat spot. So all of that hedge, all of the frontage hedge is in the right-of-way.
Is engineering typically, so these folks are doing a major remodel. Is engineering typically involved in that process already?
We are getting more involved. In the
Okay.
last year or so, we've made some changes in our processing of all building permits, be they alterations or brand-new homes. We used to look just at new homes. Now we're looking at all the alterations and things like that so that and driveway changes and things like that, so that we get to see if there's things like this, but we don't always catch it, if you will.
I see. Is there kind of good cross-department communication where
Yes.
they know the right of way and they say, hey, there's some stuff out here?
Well, we're getting the permit, we get the application for work on this property, and then what we do is we pull up our information, our plans, our LO maps that we've gone through before and look at it and go, wait a minute, we've got some things here, and then we compare their plans to it. But, so we're engaged in that entire process and have to sign off. He does a big part of that as his job, as well as going up and down the streets looking for it.
Okay, okay.
And so that's alternative one. Alternative two would be just an introduction of a citation. Code does allow for this. It's what the engineering and erosion control program utilizes if we have a code violation for erosion control. And so Chapter 42 does refer to what I shared today as civil violations. And then we would follow municipal court proceedings for a violation fee. It has not been our practice to do this. Alternative three would be the same, but rather than issue the citation, we would start by invoicing a fee and a SELA. The benefit to this may be that that money could, potentially be earmarked for addressing those issues where we do in fact have to dispatch public works staff to take out a violation. And that's the goal.
Is that too tall?
It's a different country, different rules.
Different place. This is not LO.
Can I, is there a, it seems that one issue I'm hearing is that while it is possible to have folks make these corrections and trim the hedges back, and we see they make a big difference, is that then over time they grow back and you're back out there again, spending staff time getting them to trim the hedge back. Is there, and so the best long-term solution may be in some cases to just, remove, and I kind of wonder, can you see a system where people are given the opportunity to keep their vegetation managed themselves, but that these kind of repeated instances of having to return to, so that they say, hey, I mean, if we keep having to come back, then it's going to be removal. Like we compel the removal of it. Because it seems, are we kind of asking these cases really just for the trimming? Doesn't seem like we've actually made anyone necessarily. Now that one last situation you showed, I mean, clearly they're going to have to remove it. I mean, the line is.
Yes, Mayor, so on Upper Drive, for instance, they did trim it back to our request.
Great.
But it's very likely that in a few years, we might be sending the same message. That entire hedge is in the right-of-way. And so it's a case where code states that hedges are not allowed in the right-of-way, but we continue to trim them back to meet safety standards. But maybe it's a case where entire removal or greater removal might be needed. And so we get somewhat or partial compliance when we send those requests out to the satisfaction of safety. And so that's kind of where we stop.
Well, it seems very reasonable. That seems like a very reasoned approach, to encourage the safety, but it seems unreasonable for having to return annually to ask people who have been put on notice to do the same thing over and over and again, and that maybe like a next step might be, to let them know that if it can't be maintained without the city continually coming out and asking them to do it, that they're kind of, we're allowing them to keep their hedge in the right-of-way as long as they can keep it trimmed for safety, but if they can't do that, or they won't do it, then we'll have to have it removed. Does that seem feasible? Or a good idea, or is that not a good?
It certainly is an option, and that's why we wanted to come forward and talk about how much more aggressive do we need to be, or do we continue with what we have? I think on page 4 of the report that Lucas did, so far, again, he's been doing this only for about 6 months worth of information. He's had fairly good compliance. Now, again, how many of those are going to be repeat? Will he go back out there next year and have to do 50% of those folks again because those laurel hedges grow like weeds, right? Right. And at what point do we say, okay, this is our 3rd time, and now we're going to not only just trim it back for you, but we're going to get rid of it? Because do we want to take on the annual trimming of it, and it's those problem places. So to be efficient, it would be better to take the hedge out. If you aren't going to keep it trimmed, we're going to take the hedge out. It's threatening. There's a lot to that. And there's all kinds of other things in the right-of-way that we haven't done to that extent either. We only showed one picture of rocks, but y'all can go into the fan and find
Right. Well,
50, 60 properties with rocks.
Yeah, and they're doing it so people don't park in front of their
Yes.
house.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Yes.
simple.
But it
and
is right of way.
They can't choose that. I think
Yeah.
rocks are pretty easy, but do we have any idea of the macro? I know you've just started on this, but, are we talking 20% of our population is out of, or 50, or 2%, or 3%?
Out of compliance with the code,
Yeah.
I would say probably a huge chunk, because it's everywhere. So
All I'm saying is, I
Yeah.
know the Sen wants to just bulldoze everything, but I would think we would have a bigger audience than last night if we would decree that.
Oh, no, and we should, no.
And we might have pitchforks.
Yeah, but we have to do it because the reason.
No, we don't.
No, yeah, we have to.
You might.
Then let's not enforce anything, because if I know folks are violating the code. You're not doing anything. If you come to me, I call it as discrimination. I say, why they're not? Because the law, everyone, we are all equal. No one can be left like you don't want people in here. When you go there, there are places you cannot park, and because folks put rocks, big rocks, or they put even, you know that, oh, it's a nice lawn, but it's not, it's on the right of way. Oh, it has to be bulldozed, it has to be removed. That's how city functions, that's how we have to apply the law for everyone. Because as long as we continue to let go, people will continue to do it. And at some point, it will create more problem than it is. We just have to talk to people, information, talk to them and say, folks, you are on the right of way. We are giving you time to fix this.
Okay.
We can, yeah.
Okay.
But then the time has a limit. If they don't fix it, we come with our bulldozers and then
Take the house out.
not the house, but anything that's on the right of way.
Okay.
This is it. I mean, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Boop. Councilor Afghan, question?
I don't know if we legally can go into somebody's property and taking their trees or shrubs down because they grow into
they're in the
the right of way.
Well, they're the ones that are in the right of way. They're on the right.
Sure. And the stuff we're talking about, they're not going to grow each year so much that it would block the right of ways.
No, laurel bushes do.
Laurel bushes
They're on
every year
steroids,
because
yeah.
in our neighborhood, they don't grow that fast. But
We have to water
here's my,
I think they're
right now, we have
over
a
there.
good system. If there is a complaint, then our enforcement officers will go look at it, they address it. There is no reason to start policing everything and start going systematically from one side of the city to the other side and start correcting some things and agitating people that we don't need to do. If we have a right-of-way that we need to clean up and enlarge the space for a specific reason, sure. But just doing it because it's in violation and doesn't add any value and agitate the residents, I don't think this is the route we want to go.
So are you saying that when it's a safety, there's a safety component?
Absolutely,
focus?
yes.
Yeah.
And if there's a complaint, so all the pictures that,
What if it's a complaint because they just don't get along?
and we have
it's
to
a
address it
revenge
just
complaint.
like any other items we have.
But if it's just a complaint, like, no, seriously, if there's no safety, if it's on a street that 10 cars drive down, and Director Rooney's never even been down there in her life, but the neighbors are irritated with each other, and so they're pulling it, well, they wouldn't do anything because they're not going down there. But if it's a complaint, I'm just saying, do we enforce just because one neighbor, and they get the tapes out and look at the property lines and all that stuff?
If it's a violation, I believe our compliance officer, he goes out there and says, yep, it's in violation,
Even if it's not a safety factor?
even if it's not a safety factor.
Oh, that's interesting, okay.
It's-
Interesting mix. So safety, or if your neighbor complains.
Or anybody complains.
So the only problem with complaint-driven enforcement is I know I'm going to use a word that's not fashionable, or it's really actually quite inequitable, because you might have a neighborhood that doesn't like you, or because you might actually be living with a safety violation and just not feel good about calling City Hall for whatever reason, and you might be shy. And so I do think that we need to be responsive to complaints, but I don't necessarily think that we act on every complaint, if that makes any sense. I would say we might take the first, if you complained about my laurel hedge, which is in the backyard, so you won't complain, and I hate the thing. And Lucas came out and said it's not creating a traffic hazard, it's not encroaching on the sidewalk. Yeah, it's maybe a little bit over the curb, but it's not causing any harm. I would say, Lucas, don't spend a lot of energy on it, right? If it, however, is making it impossible to see the stop sign, right, making it impossible to walk, covering reducing ADA access, then I think Lucas, so yes, I think we should take complaints, but I don't think we should necessarily
Well,
aggressively
it's like hearing
enforce.
from the Evergreen Neighborhood Association on the Berwick, like that
Yeah.
comes up because that's a well-traveled street, a legitimate safety complaint, you know.
I do think that.
The way you said it, I can support it 100%.
I do think the question that staff really needs to make sure that you guys are clear on, though, is that when they do get to this place where they're actually levying fees, levying citations, we will have some folks who are not very happy. And so, to Councilor Wendland's point, I don't know that they'll go straight to pitchforks, but many of these hedges were put in for privacy reasons, right? And so you're going to hear from folks saying, we disagree, we don't want to take this out, or we don't want to trim this hedge. And so I think we need to make sure we hit the policy intent of the council so that when the feedback comes that folks are not happy with what we're doing, that we really are in line with what you want us to do.
Could there be a system, I'm just thinking, you know, because again, the issue being the repeated visits, could there be a system of, I mean, obviously we have that one hedge where the person just flat out refuses to trim it. Okay, boom, some kind of enforcement fee, you know, to compel them to comply or whatnot. Then you have the instance where people do comply, but you're constantly going back out there. Could there be some system of, hey, right now, that's great, you complied, but return visits where even if they fix it, but there's just the fact you're having to continue to tell them to do it, there is some kind of an enforcement fee attached to that so instead of removing it, just to say, but if we have to keep coming out here to tell you to do it, then in addition to doing it, you're also going to have to pay a fine for us having to remind you. Is that?
Repeat offenders, you
Repeat offenders, yeah.
Let me answer the question two ways. I think it would be more challenging to have an enforcement scheme where the enforcement fee was escalated depending on the number of times that we had contacted the person. And the reason I say that is because of the word you used, which is an offense. Typically, if you want to escalate enforcement, a person has to have been convicted of some sort of offense. And so in this particular enforcement scheme, it's perfectly acceptable to say, hey, we've identified a violation. The time it took us to investigate, identify, we're charging an enforcement fee for that. But then if we move to issuing a citation, that's how you would write code, is to say if you have one or more citations, your second citation is X amount of fees, your third citation. So you could escalate it that way, but I guess I just want to reemphasize that the question before you is really, do you even want to engage in a citation process that you haven't before? But if you did want to engage in a citation process, yes, you could have escalating fees. And the only other thing that I would say about that is those citations come to your municipal court. And so your city prosecutor and your municipal court will be handling those violations exactly the same way we do, for example, traffic violations. So, or other code violations. It is not a process that we have used, the court process itself. We just haven't had to use that. I have to give a shout out to Mr. Youngblood, who is a remarkable person when it comes to resolving these complaints, short of issuing a citation. But I guess I just wanted to emphasize it would be a change that would result in some workload, both for the court and for our office. But certainly in prosecuting cases like that, you would have the oversight of the city attorney's office, as well as potentially a code enforcement scheme where, you know, your first time we would defer a sentence maybe. The second time we would impose a fee. The third time we'd impose an even bigger fee. So that's how I think the enforcement scheme would end up working if that's what you all wanted to do. And I just, while I have the floor, I'll say one other thing about public nuisance. Councilor Afghan, to your question, what is the legality, what is the process, is how I would put it, for removing encroachments on the right-of-way. And I think the staff report really tried to get at this question of it kind of depends where the root ball is, which was what you were saying, Mayor. Well, if there's an encroachment in our right-of-way, well, gosh darn it, we can just yank it out. Probably that's correct. If it's a root ball that's half and half, you know, I mean, right, then the other example where it's like, you know, the encroachment comes from a root ball that puts out vegetation into the right of way. The staff report is trying to be very careful, and Mr. Boone was as well, to advise that in those instances, what we have to do is actually declare it to be a public nuisance because it arises from private property. So we would have to declare it to be a private nuisance through a court proceeding, and that's the way we would actually get to remove the vegetation. So it's a more complicated process if what we're trying to do is remove it.
I would think it seems like most people want to follow the rules and fees and citations. I mean, they have an impact, you know, people do not, there might be some outliers who rip them up and throw them in the trash or whatnot, but for the most part, I think that hits people pretty heavily.
And I think it's, again, going back to, you know, we've done this now for 6 months in a proactive way where he's gone up and down key corridors and mostly major arterials, what is it, Country Club, Boca Raton, Goodall, some of the South Shore that he's in progress with. When people get that letter that says, here's the code, you're in violation, you got 30 days to fix it, we're getting an 86% compliance rate so far, which is kind of shocking. I didn't expect that, actually. And so that's not bad for not having to charge them any fees at all.
Yeah, ideally, if
but
we
it's
do
not
do a
perfect,
fee in
but
a
it's-
citation system, it's
It'll
ideally,
be-
it's rarely used, you know, but.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that we've had a remarkable compliance rate. I think people want to do the right thing. I think for the most part, people don't know. And so that's why I think we want to be very careful about our enforcement process.
Exactly.
Because I guarantee anybody who doesn't live on a street without, let's see, how can I put this? People who live on a street with curb and sidewalk kind of know where the right-of-way is, right? We don't have too much encroachment. We got one example, but we don't have a lot of problem with people saying, this is where the street is and this is my property behind it. These places that don't have curb and gutter, it's Wild West.
Right.
People have no idea, and it gets, the fan is at least on a grid system, so you kind of could follow it where some of the fence lines are, but you get anywhere outside of that, you get on Berwick, anyway, people have no idea where their right-of-way line is. If they've never done any building recently in the last 25 years, they've never had their property surveyed, they do not know that they don't own right up to the pavement. They think it's theirs. So it's very confusing to know where the right-of-way
I
is.
think we found,
Councilor Wendland, then Councilor Burnett.
I think we found that out when we were putting in the sidewalks for the pathways. I mean, some of the people up in Hallinan thought, well, no, this is my land. And it was like, well, you were taking care of it for a long time, for 30 years or whatever, and I understand that, but it's actually not yours, and look at the great improvement we did. I know that we had a heck of a time convincing everybody. What do other cities do? Have we figured out, like with Westland or different places? Is there kind of like?
So the one thing I'll speak to, just having worked in other agencies before, this code that puts the responsibility on the property owners to maintain the right-of-way is very common. You'll find it in Portland, you'll find it in West Lynn, you'll find it in Wilsonville. So that code, which I think was about the fourth one that you showed in your, the one that at the end of the day says it's their responsibility. I can't quote it off the top of my head, but that is very, very common. And other agencies, from what I know and have experienced, they will tell you it's the property owner's responsibility, but sometimes they have programs where you can, for like sidewalk repair in particular, they'll have grants or less expensive permitting process to fix those sidewalks and stuff. But at the end of the day, this code is still always there. I don't know from some of your research as well.
I know that there's at least one or two, the person working in my position before me did this research and found that some cities will charge a property owner and they'll come out and do removal or landscaping themselves. And so I could see what we're proposing in alternative 3, this invoicing a fee in a cella, could be used in that method as well, or that money could be set aside for issues in other places in the city.
Well, just some feedback. I understand that in certain situations, we want to go out and do the job ourselves because no one can do it just right, sometimes the right way. I don't necessarily think, to me, that is kind of like rewarding bad behavior to a certain extent. And I totally get it. And I know, believe me, parents do it all the time with their kids. Okay, clean up after dinner. And then there's a bigger mess than when you started, and then you just now spend twice the amount of time cleaning up after dinner. So I get that. The bigger picture, though, I think is I guess the fairness, or I like the idea of invoicing, or giving the people the option to say, hey, listen, this is a complex job that you have. You've got a big, like the one down in whatever, the big hedge that we took. Yeah. We can, you can do it, or we can do it, and the approximate cost is, whatever, $5,000. Please respond in 30 days, and at least with an action plan or whatever. But I just have a problem where we're making the decision on which child we're helping, and we should help all the children if we're going, sort of parenting is you have to kind of treat everybody the same. So that I have a little bit of a problem with. What?
Or neglect all of them.
Or neglect all of them, yes, right. But I guess I'm just looking at the bigger picture of sort of, we need to let the homeowner or the property owner know that they do have an issue. And I don't know if we did or not, or we just did it at that particular location. Did we tell them we were doing it?
On Furnace?
Yeah.
There was a bit of back and forth.
It was what?
There was a bit of back and forth
Oh,
on it.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I
We
mean,
even had our surveyor out there to determine exactly where the right-of-way was, which we
Right.
can't afford to do that. It's
No,
too
no,
much
and I
intense, but yeah.
think we need to do it efficiently and the most cost-effective way that we can. But for me to write out a check for $5,000 from the city because we want to do it to a private contractor, I got a problem with that. If it's our maintenance crew and we can just do a quick take out a tree thing and it works and it's not that big of a deal and it's in our budgets, but when you're starting now to have a sideline item that we're dealing with, I think that's where I have a little bit of an issue of how to do that. I do think that the property owner should be responsible for it. We give them the option, and if they don't clean it up, that to me on Furnace was a pretty big improvement. And undoubtedly, and I'm not questioning why you did it. I think you did a fabulous job, and it works great. But is that an apartment there, or is that or condos? Okay, well, you know what? There's 10 or 15 people that live there, and they're higher priced, and sorry, write a check. And I will say that if we give the option, it's kind of the concierge service of saying, hey, it's going to be about this much if you want to have it done. People will write checks in Lake Oswego just to make a problem. My feeling is certainly the safety part, and where it's just overgrown, and be upfront. I like the 87% compliance rate, so it must be a great letter that you're warm and engaging. Well, no, I'm serious.
no.
If you can be warm and engaging and saying, hey, we're just trying to update and make safety our number one concern for Lake Oswego, can you do this? And if you can't, let us know, and we have services that we can, have it do. Maybe, I don't know if you want to get that business or not, but it's certainly, if we have a carrot sort of to the certain extent with wonderful, nice, encouraging messaging, instead of, you're in violation, you have 30 days to do this. And that's why code enforcement, I think, why we do such a good job is because we've got somebody that actually has a heart and has a brain, and they go together and they make it work out. And I think that's the flavor I would rather see in Lake Oswego instead of the hard, where you're, the only last thing on this, when you bill it or whatever, you invoice it on the Acela system, is that what it is? Sounds like a train system in New York, I think. That's the Acela, whatever. That just stays on there, and they get billed, or they get invoiced, or it just stays, and they don't have to pay it until they pull another permit? Is that our?
So I'm not totally sure how we would address, I'd have to discuss this with community development and see how. Yeah, I don't know if Bill wants
The
to
A-team right
comment.
behind you.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, of course.
Good evening, Bill Youngblood. I'm still trying to get over a cold, so I'll try not to cough too much. So the way it works is actually a module in Acela for code enforcement. And so you go in, you create a record, and it's just it's a tracking system, but it's also a great way to invoice charges. So, the person typically in code enforcement, they pay code enforcement staff. We go in, credit the invoice that's in the Acela system. Thank you. And it goes to the right location, the money. So we've been using it, I think, for 3 years now, and it's very good. We like it.
Good. So you feel efficient that you can issue the citation or whatever, the fee or the whatever you want to call it.
So,
you can get
right, so we call them violation fees.
violation fees.
Because it is different than a citation. And that's the point, is to try to get these issues resolved without going through the court system. And that's one of the challenges, is if you do have something, an action that needs to occur, especially for safety reasons, it may take, likely will take a minimum of 3 months to get it resolved, just to go through the court system. So it's very time intensive, and we really want to try to get it resolved with the property owner being cooperative.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So Councilman, are you I hear you clearly, you like the educational approach, writing the letter. Are you in favor of the not having any kind of enforcement behind it? Just a letter, and if they don't comply, we just
Well, I mean,
send them another letter?
I think if we have a safety issue, we need to do a deal with it, and then you have to go through the steps to get it resolved.
So you like it being
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think we have to
progressive.
follow that process.
number 3?
Right, number 3. I mean,
No, it's not starting with a heavy-handed approach, but
No.
moving towards one if there's not compliance.
Correct,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
wait for the heavy-handedness, because to Bill's point, I mean, we do not want them in the court system, because that just takes up a whole bunch of time and energy and whatever. And nobody comes out of there feeling happy. So.
Council verdict.
So I first totally agree. I think we have so many of these properties where I don't think people really even know where their property lines are. And you have hedges that have been there for however many owners. And I know the Berwick, I mean, that's been there. I was walking the dogs 25 years ago there, and that was an issue. So, I think that can be quite a shock for some homeowners. All of a sudden, they're like, whoa, I didn't even realize, and this is established. So I really appreciate the approach that you guys have been doing, and I'm pleased with the rate. So I kind of want to continue down the path that you've been doing the last 6 months. And then I think adding kind of the fee and last resort, a violation, I think it's good just to have those tools in place if needed. But again, hopefully we don't need to use them. I also wasn't sure if we ever put anything in Hello LO that just says this is your responsibility, just to remind people what it is. And and I don't know if we do that annual, like every spring, if we're putting that in there just to remind them.
We actually do, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Okay, I was
Typically,
just gonna say, it's a perfect time to just kind of
little
remind people
diagram, yeah.
of that, and hopefully too, they'll take action. So, but yeah, I think focusing on safety is really important, is the key to me. I think we're gonna get down a rabbit hole if we start being kind of little drill sergeants, making sure everyone's like perfectly, so safety for me is the key.
And Councilor Corrigan.
I agree with alternative number 3. It makes sense. It's progressive. And I agree with Councilor Winland's comment on tone. It makes all the difference. So I certainly support that. And safety's first. The thing I'm kind of wondering about are the rocks in the, one contractor puts rocks in the right-of-way, and then down the street, rocks in the right-of-way, and the impact of CFEC and how, at some point, the rocks are going to have to come out of the right-of-way. That will happen, but I mean, it's even on my street, with the rocks in the
So
right-of-way.
Erica and I have had a discussion about that. I think if you want us to remove rocks in the right of way, I'm back to my comment about equity. We can't wait, we can't just do complaints. We're gonna need to do it. I would suggest that if we're gonna do that, and we do it neighborhood by neighborhood, and we do some pretty extensive education before anything happens, so that no one can say when they get the letter from Lucas, I didn't know it was gonna happen. And I think, to your point, Councilor Corrigan, explaining why will be absolutely critical. And I think the impact of CFAC is clearly more, it's more obviously felt in neighborhoods that are close to commercial districts like First Edition or Old Town or the areas around Lake Grove Boulevard. But the rocks exist all over town. So I think we need to think through how to really articulate why letting people park in the right-of-way is good for the community. And I think that's the part that's hard. I think all of us would prefer that the only people who park in front of our own homes are people we know. And I think that concern that you hear from time to time about safety and access, and I know Councilor Afghan and I first met, I think, talking about parking in his neighborhood. I know that's more keenly felt in certain neighborhoods than others. So I think if you want us to go after the rocks,
I think that's an easy one.
Yeah.
tell me more about why it's easy.
Well, I think that in addition to the comments around parking in general, like what I see is there's not even then a place for, there's so many delivery vehicles now, so many, and they just have to then stop in the street.
Right.
And so then they're stopped, cars are trying to get, I mean, it does seem really dangerous, or they block the pedestrian walkway instead of having that pull-off to go into because someone's put rocks there, which is like, because they're not driving down anyone's driveway, you know, they're not gonna back up. So and it's public right-of-way. I think those people have to understand, it's not their property. They're using, they've co-opted the public's right-of-way, and it's not.
Okay, so I want to make sure that if we're going to do this, that a majority of you want us to do this, and we'll bring you back a public education campaign and a rollout.
Rocks?
What?
If you're breaking rules, then the rules are set in place for a reason. If
Thank you.
rocks in a right of way and they're not supposed to be there, then you gotta.
There's no,
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's-
Mayor Buck, we just talked about a
Rules are
situation
in place
where
for a
but I have.
safety needs to be number one. We all agreed on that.
Not just-
And then we said, if somebody's breaking the rule and the neighbor does this and that, and it's not safety, okay, we just say, this is not safety, it's okay. But now we're shifting from that position. So we remove the rocks, but what if somebody has a retaining wall, short retaining wall, along the same line as these rocks? Are we gonna say, remove the retaining wall? So it's,
So can I?
I'll chime in on
keeps
that.
going.
For someone who just, in the last 5 years, remodeled and built a whole house, the proper process is when you're building a house, you work with the city, where you're supposed to get a permit with the city, to know where you can build and where you cannot. And the risk is, if you choose to either A, not do the permit, and you make a mistake, the risk is someone comes and tells you, hey, you gotta rip it down. The other risk is you don't, the other risk is you make a mistake and you build over the line, you still have to remove it. Like, we all have to play by the same rules. We're a rule-making body, just like we were talking about last night. You put rules in place to keep everybody in line. And as cliche as it is, without rules, everything turns to chaos. Like, you have to treat everybody the same. Like, I understand everybody's point, but for someone who played by the rules, it's what you're supposed to do. There's a process in place, so don't, it sucks to have to remove a retaining wall. Believe me, as a homeowner, I'd be really pissed off, but it's also like, well, if you did the right things, you should have known to not build the retaining wall there.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate,
No,
but I think that
no.
also the times these are gonna happen are gonna be few and far between. So.
Okay, well,
So,
Councilor-
yeah, like me,
But just answer the rock question.
no, I have the floor.
You, well,
Turn off his mic.
Don't worry, you're
I'm just
gonna,
kidding.
but can we just deal with the rocks?
No,
so we
it
can move
has
on?
to be, I'm with my brother, it has to be removed.
Okay, so you're for the rock, can we just,
Yep.
so I'm hearing rocks, 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 is there, count, okay, question? Councilor
How
Berry?
much staff time is dealing with these rocks going to be?
We don't know.
I mean, that's one of
We
my big
don't,
concerns.
we don't know, and that's why I'm saying to you that we'll develop a public education campaign. I would assume 85% of folks will comply, because that's the piece of evidence I have so far.
Right.
But I also assume that the 15% of the folks who don't comply will take up 85% of the time,
2025, the year where we removed
because I
rocks.
know about Pareto.
Lots of rock
Yeah,
removal.
my biggest concern is just our staff time is already so precious. And, you know, again, I think if we start ranking,
But again, I think we'd do it neighborhood by neighborhood, and we'd have to collaborate with the neighborhood associations. I don't think we'd try to do it community-wide.
And I don't think anyone's here expecting you to do it in a matter of weeks or a month.
I'm just saying, my concern is staff time. If there's a way we can do it and it makes sense, okay, but, you know, again, I think there's a certain point, sometimes you pick and choose your battles, and I'm just, for me, I'm not sure this is,
Right, but I think there's definitely people, I don't like the idea of somebody putting rocks out in front of their house so that nobody can park there, or that they've already, I mean, that, to me, they know they're not doing things.
I'm not saying I like it either, I'm just
Right.
saying,
But all I'm saying is that it's a lot easier to get a campaign and basically say, hey, by the end of 2025, if you have rocks in the right-of-way, you know, we're going to come visit you.
Yeah.
I mean, you do it in a really nice way, but I think, to your point, Martha, going through a educational process and say, hey, and listing the reasons why this is not okay, that we have right-of-ways, but more importantly, it's a safety issue. I mean, I agree. A lot of Amazon trucks and whatever, they park really in the middle of the street, and, you know, it's not right, but it's not wrong for them because they can't park in rocks. And it's a space that they're taking up that people are just, it's kind of like property rights. Oh, have I talked about property rights?
So one thing I want to say, that it's more than just rocks. And I'll just use the fan as an example, because they've gone through a lot of redevelopment over the years. There's people who've used rocks in the right-of-way, some for 20-plus years, others in the last 3 years when they've redeveloped. But they've also done vegetation, mounding dirt in the right-of-way and creating a lovely, beautiful vegetation scape there to keep people from parking. So just know that if we take away the rocks, they will ask, why aren't you taking away their vegetation that keeps me from parking in front of their house too? Because it's going to be pretty obvious. And so it's more than just rocks.
Yeah.
It's, should I take away the hedges too that are in the right-of-way that keep people from parking? It's not just a rock problem. I just want to be clear about that, that it's more than just no rocks.
But like, I mean, we are a city, we have to enforce the code, or we don't. Or we are using it against some and not against others. And it creates a city with two speeds. Some has to do things, because I took it very personally what the city made me do. $500,000 for a small school. But yet some folks, they do. Either we are a city that enforces the rules we have, or we don't, and we go to chaos or anarchy, and that's not what we want. It's very hard when people come and tell you, hey, this thing you structure is illegal. It's a lot of money, you have to do it, but you say, yes, this is the truth, I have to do it. So you put a wall, retaining wall. People who do that, most of them, they know. Some don't, I agree. But some, they know what they're doing. And because they know what they're doing, the city knows how to enforce the rules. We are writing a letter, nice letter, please remove this thing. We think you are encroaching on the right of way. Or you don't think, we go again and we follow all the procedures and we remove it. So people know that this is a city where people respect the rules. And I see our enforcer, like Bill, is doing a wonderful job. I know people come and say, oh, Bill came and talked to me very nicely. These are witnesses, not you, but people told me, oh, Mr. Youngblood came and helped me. And he's doing that thing. We should continue that way because these are our neighbors. But we have to tell them, even though we are talking nicely to you, you are going to respect the code. I mean, you can put a nice lawn. If they let the nice lawn, I will put my rocks. That's just, we have to do this thing. It will take time. We have to talk to people, and we continue a very nice campaign, you know, but it's a civism, like it's a, I don't know, civism. It's like following the rules of civics. Like you belong to a city, the city has rules, let's respect it, to live in common and to live nicely together. If everybody is doing whatever they want, it won't work. And we have the means as a city to enforce the code. We have our police, we are nice, we have the court, we have everything. We are coming with, Mr. Youngblood is your best bet. He's coming very nice, but you gotta respect him. If you don't, we have our court. And when we come, you'll know that we are government. And it's the way it should work. We cannot just sit here, be nice, because it's Lake Oswego, we have to be nice. Yes, it's Lake Oswego, we have to be nice, but we have to enforce the rules of law.
But I think we have other communities that are in the same boat.
And we don't enforce every violation of every code. Let me be clear. Not every person who runs a stop sign in Lake Oswego, if you didn't know that, please get on your email and your neighbors will let you know that what I'm about to say is true. Not everyone who runs a stop sign is issued a ticket.
If they are not seen, because they are not seen, but
Even
if the police
even
is
if they
behind
are seen, the city exercises discretion in enforcement.
But
We are
discussion
trying.
what? If it's, for example, the mayor who run a red light, you don't enforce it. Is it that way? Because we can go
because what we're trying to do is what one of you said earlier, I don't remember which one, which is create a place where there's relative order. And sometimes the enforcement action isn't the appropriate way to achieve the outcome.
That's right.
Now, I want to question this. I mean, I hear what Erica is saying, but I will say, in addition to rocks, I mean, all over town, there are people who've put planter boxes in the right-of-way, and probably they didn't. Probably somebody who owned the house, 2 or 3 owners again, and they're growing their gardens in the right. I mean, are we going after all of those? No.
I said not right-of-ways. I talked parking places.
Well, that is the right of way. I mean,
Well, but there's a lot of right-of-ways and.
You're
like
talking
Oswego
about
that
the
are-
right-of-way that's outside the pavement.
Right.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about where somebody deliberately basically says,
clear
I don't want
parking
somebody to park in
delineation.
front of my house. And you go up and you go down the street and they're the only ones with the rocks out in
Okay,
front.
and I see enough heads nodding that let us try to figure this out because, yeah, I understand. I have a couple heads shaking too.
Well, yeah.
But I see more than 4 heads nodding. Let us figure this out because I do think that what Erica is trying to articulate is that once we start down the path of enforcing parking areas, there will be other questions. And so we just need to be able to articulate where we are choosing to exercise our discretion.
That's right.
And where we're not choosing, and what is the reason for that?
Right. I mean,
Again, I'm back to if we're
because
going
we
to.
definitely have had, we've had people encroach in the right of way recently where we have had them remove significant
Yes.
built. So this is not like a new
Yes.
thing. Okay, I mean, we're doing it now. I mean, people who have built significantly into public spaces that we have had, well, there's multiple examples. Yes, structures that they have built.
Yeah, see, they
we
know
have
that
had.
they're
So, I
not
mean,
supposed to do that.
this
So-
isn't like a newfound thing that no one's ever been told. I mean, people are right now being told. But I think the city's been really judicious about how they go about, doing it. And I hear Councilwoman's point. I think we kind of know those are the obvious examples. But I think to like the
slam
alternative
dunk.
one, that seems like a really, where's Lucas?
We
We
had to
lost.
change, sorry.
There's been a switch, a morphine. We lost Lucas.
Had to do it.
Lucas grew a beard.
Yeah, wow.
Got
That
older.
alternative one, like,
Hey,
because some of these
did you guys
situations.
tell him now that by the time he's a year, he has to have a beard? So did you tell him that's part of the club here?
Good job.
There's, for a lot of these properties where there has been over time, kind of an intrusion into the right of way, when it is redeveloped, that does seem to be the time. So that alternative one, to make sure those are aligning seems key. That's the time to get them. Because I think a lot of the examples we're thinking of, these are the redeveloped properties that have had to have the set aside for that right of way, and then they came and put the rocks there, and they're probably not going to get redeveloped for quite a while. But some of these others are the ones who, in the near future will probably be redeveloped, and then that's when the planter boxes and the, stuff go away, so. But I'm hearing a consensus around alternative 3, of course, not being the first approach. And then how do you all feel about alternative 1, where there's more coordination between community development and engineering as properties are redeveloped and building permits are being issued on getting those corrections? Yes?
Sounds like you're already starting to do that, so.
So you agree with it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I
Okay.
would continue to.
Okay. Okay, everyone's aligned on that.
Efficiency.
And so what I heard was, if I got that right, is that start towards alternative 3, which is setting up fees and citation.
Yeah.
After the letter,
Yeah, set up those
The current
extra 2
approach.
bullets on the bottom
to get the
there.
other 14%.
Okay. And then,
Alternative 1.
what did we say about the other issue about?
And, alternative 1,
You and I are going to work on a plan, and we'll sit down with the communications folks, because I think it'll become a communication. I mean, it is also a staffing issue in terms of how much can you take on at any one time.
So we'll come back with all of that, is what I heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't sound like, I mean, unless we are on the wrong track, it doesn't sound like we need a lot more council direction, so we would just be reporting to you. Because I hear at least 5 of you agreeing we should do it, and 2 of you with reservations. Okay.
all good points.
So engineering and community development then will be on the same page, kind of following the same guidelines, and you can have more teeth other than just a letter.
I think there might be code adjustments needed for both alternative 1 and alternative 3.
Right, and some master fees and charges and changes. If we want to get to be consistent with the way that community development does it, we would have to do a couple changes, but they should be pretty minor. We'll check on that.
Alternative 1 is just in building permit
That one's
situations.
not so bad.
Yeah.
We're doing that now. We're just starting to make sure that we review every building permit that comes through. We didn't used to.
And we know it's a lot of work, and all of the examples that Lucas gave are really good examples. I mean, those are all areas, like, we know those areas, right? We have seen the cars brushing up against the bushes. We have brushed up against them. And those are great examples of good reasoned application of this code that, keeps the community safe in these areas. And he's doing a good job.
Yeah, it's been amazing. I was amazed at the numbers on how much he got done, because he does have other work that he does too that's not even been talked
very
about here.
limited part of
It's
his
not his only job. He's doing well.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it.
We appreciate your
Thank you
time
very
and your
much.
input. It's helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah, great job.
I'm just a sit-in for Lucas.
Yes, it did. Okay, we're going to take a brief recess before our next study session. It did take longer. Here, Okay, we're back in order. Next item on the agenda is item 10.2. This is a study session on home occupation standards. Glad to welcome Michael McNamee, our associate planner, presenting with a PowerPoint.
Thank you. Good evening, councilors, mayor. My name is Michael McNamee. I'm an associate planner with the planning department. And I'm here to discuss a potential update of our specific use standards for home occupations in the Community Development Code. Council provided direction back in June of last year to look into making the standards easier to understand and enforce. So first of all, to make sure we're all on the same page, let's talk about what home occupations are, which are a type of business that are licensed and operated from a residential dwelling unit. And that's different from an employee of a company that's based elsewhere who works from home. So just want to make that distinction. The most common types of home occupation businesses in Lake Oswego are, in order, interior designers, contractors, administrative services, professional, scientific, and technical services, and computer or software services. Although it's worth mentioning that these top 5 categories together still only represent about a quarter of the home occupation licenses in the city. Home occupations tend to make up about a quarter of all business licenses issued every year by the city. In 2020 and 21, there was a slight uptick to about a third of the total, which is probably not surprising since those were COVID years. As of January 1st of this year, there were 577 active home occupation licenses citywide. Home occupations are permitted as an accessory use to a dwelling unit, provided they meet specific use standards that are laid out in the Accessory Structures and Uses section of the Community Development Code. The specific use standards require operators to maintain a valid business license, prohibit outside employees besides family members who live on site, disallow outside storage of goods other than vegetation, and place a limit on the size of the home occupation relative to the aggregate developed floor area on the lot. Marijuana and psilocybin facilities are also outlawed as home occupations, and there are standards for short-term rentals in this section as well, since those are regulated as home occupations. The focus of this project is on the first subcriterion in the specific use standards, which says that a home occupation use can't alter the residential character of the neighborhood or infringe upon the rights of residents in the vicinity to the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. And I will be referring to this as subcriterion 1 throughout the presentation. My apologies, there isn't really a better name for it. The reason staff have targeted this standard for replacement is because the concepts of neighborhood character and peaceful enjoyment are difficult to define, which makes them hard to understand and enforce. The goal of this process is to hopefully replace subcriterion 1 with a new set of standards that are measurable and clear so that the public, home occupation owners, and city staff can easily understand what's expected for home occupation businesses. So to get to this point in the process, staff has performed research into home occupation regulations for peer jurisdictions, mostly other cities in the Portland Metro or the Willamette Valley, to help provide a starting point for potential new regulations for us. We also took a lot of input from code enforcement at various points during the process. Staff presented to the Neighborhood Chairs Committee at their meeting on January 18th, where we got some initial feedback about the project. The Planning Commission had a first work session on this project back on January 27th, and their input helped to inform the concepts that will be presented today. Staff also sent a survey to all active home occupation license holders, asking them about how well they understood and how big of an impact existing and potential new zoning requirements would be. At its close, 157 people responded to that survey, so that was a pretty decent response rate. After today's council work session, there are several tentative dates scheduled for this project. Staff will have another work session with the Planning Commission on April 14th to work out specific code language. Then draft code amendments will be presented to the commission at a public hearing on May 28th, with potential findings a week and a half later on June 9th. Staff would then present the commission's recommendation to the council at a public hearing on July 1st. So, based on Pierce City research and feedback received so far from the Planning Commission, Neighborhood Chairs Committee, and Code Enforcement staff, staff have arrived at 7 possible new regulations in concept to replace subcriterion 1. Staff doesn't expect that all of these concepts will find their way into the final code amendments, but several of them probably will be needed to get to the spirit of neighborhood character and peaceful enjoyment. Part of what staff is hoping for, as far as council's input today, are any thoughts about which concepts they like or don't, so that staff can start narrowing down the list a bit. And I will go through each of these ideas briefly on the following slides. One thing that's worth noting before I continue is because most home occupations are business types that typically involve a low impact to the surrounding neighborhood, and these new regulations that we might adopt to replace subcriterion 1 would most likely not be widely applicable to all home occupations. And this is reflected in the results of the survey, where many people indicated that they only have a home office or don't even really conduct business at their home at all. They just have the license there. Code enforcement does deal with complaints about home occupations stemming from neighborhood character or peaceful enjoyment, but we're mostly talking about a small subset of home occupations. That being said, these businesses still provide valuable services and strengthen the city's economy, so it's still worthwhile to determine reasonable, easy to understand limits for them. So, first concept could be to limit the number of clients who are permitted at the dwelling at one time. So this would help to limit activity overall at the home occupation at a given time, addressing 2 of the biggest complaints neighbors tend to have about home occupations: traffic and noise. Limiting client visitation in some way is a pretty common regulation among peer cities, and enforcement suggested basing the limit on the total number of clients at the dwelling at once, rather than regulating the number who could come over it, or yes, who could come over at a certain period, who could come over a certain period of time, because that would be easier to enforce. The city could also place a limitation on the number of commercial vehicles associated with a home occupation. For ease of enforcement, staff suggested basing the regulation on visible logos or commercial markings. This would mostly help to address the neighborhood character piece of subcriterion 1. But in the past, enforcement has dealt with cases where a business uses their home as staging for commercial vehicles and had employees coming to their home to pick up vehicles for the day, which is something that could also have an impact on neighbors' peaceful enjoyment. In the survey, about 8% of respondents said they had a non-personal vehicle at home. That was one of the things that we asked about. However, based on written comments, it appears most of these people interpreted the question to mean, do you have client vehicles parked at home? Rather than being about commercial vehicles. So looking at the results, staff determined that of the yes responses in our sample, probably only about 1 or 2 likely actually had a commercial vehicle parked at the dwelling. So the actual percentage is probably more like 1% of the sample that we have.
Because I know there's a lot, they might not have a home-based business, but, especially people in the trades, they park their work. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, so it could be like a contractor who has a truck that they carry their equipment in, that they park at home, that kind of thing.
Yeah, okay, well, I would be really hesitant to limit that. That's like their business, is the truck.
Right, yeah, and so we probably wouldn't be talking about fully banning, but maybe placing a number, like a limit on, you can't go
like a
above
fleet.
certain number. Yeah, right, something like that.
Gotcha. Unless you had a driveway for it. Thank you, sorry for the interruption.
Works. Okay. The city could also place some sort of limits on outdoor activities associated with home occupations. Outdoor activities have the potential to impact both the neighborhood character and peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. And the city has dealt with some complaints about this in the recent past. Based on those complaints, we made it policy to not allow outdoor activities. So that's how we're treating this currently. And it's currently enforced based on complaints. It's not explicit in the city code. If the city were to codify this policy, it could result in adverse impacts on more home occupations than under our current application of the policy, since it would outlaw outdoor activities that neighbors aren't complaining about currently. The Planning Commission and Neighborhood Chairs Committee also expressed some concerns that limiting outdoor activities outright was too restrictive and might ban businesses that are actually beneficial to neighborhoods. In the survey, respondents were asked about the idea of banning outdoor activities only in the evening and overnight hours, and also asked about limiting the total size, so the floor area or the outdoor area that they could take up. Several people expressed support of limiting the hours, but there were also respondents who were concerned about the idea or thought the limit should maybe start later in the evening. The idea of limiting the overall size of outdoor activities did generate a little bit more concern in the survey results.
The size of outdoor activity, the number of participants?
No, so we looked at in concept the idea of saying like you couldn't take up more than 1,000 square feet outside, something like that, to sort of address that neighborhood character aspect.
Are you, taking like fitness classes or?
Yeah, so it could be something like that. Sorry.
Like swimming pool parties where you have, if you have a pool and you have parties every hour on the hour and have 100 kids show up. And
What are the
rent out your pool?
Yeah, exactly. But what are the examples that aren't the parties and the fitness? What, did you know?
Well, those were the main examples I came prepared with. But
You can rent
beekeeping
your
or something?
your backyard
Bees.
out to walk, to have dogs play in your backyard. That's one. Drop off your kids, take care.
When the neighbors said there was activities that are beneficial, I was like, kind of wondering what they're talking about.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the specific examples. But there was just the idea that some businesses might involve outdoor activities, but maybe wouldn't be
intrusive,
detrimental to the neighborhood, and possibly could be an asset. So,
like yoga or meditating.
Groups. We've had
Meditating.
Past complaint of a person that was doing outdoor concerts at their home, advertising them on Facebook. And a person that was doing, not conferences, I'm not sure the right word, but they would invite folks to their house, do a presentation with them in the backyard. So it really, the challenges have been the few folks who do try to bring a large number of people over to their homes and do something outside on a regular basis. So there's a certain group out there of folks who are going to try to push the envelope as much as they can. So I think one thing that would go a long way is limiting the number of persons that could be at the business at one time.
Is that the example you're using? Is that a business or is that a hobby that that person has?
So that's a good question, and it can be very difficult sometimes. So money would need to change hands for it to be a business. So they would need to, the cases that we've seen, people pay a fee. So they're, the outdoor pool parties, they're renting by the hour. The person that was doing the presentations was also charging a fee to attend the session. They were even parking at a school site and busing people to their house because to help with parking. So it's really amazing what
Entrepreneurs.
Yes,
That's helpful. No, thank you for those examples. No.
Yes, we are America.
Okay.
all right.
Okay.
So moving on to the next concept, which is about amplified sound. So code enforcement staff have pretty consistently indicated that putting a direct ban on noise above a certain level is hard to enforce. The violation has to be documented as it's occurring, which is challenging for a transient problem like noise. So one possible way of getting at this would be to impose limits on amplified sound. And so the city could ban speakers altogether, just outdoors or inside as well. Recognizing that sometimes if you have doors or windows open and your speakers are inside, people can still hear it outside. Or we could come up with a limit on the power level of speakers if we wanted to allow for some amplified sound, but wanted to restrict it above a reasonable level. But we definitely need to do more research to determine if that was feasible.
Is there currently a limit on non-business related sound volumes and on property? I'm assuming there is, like.
Yes.
Yes, there is. Might want help from Bill on that one too.
On back.
No worries. So in our nuisance regulations, there's, some very broad language about illegal noise, and then there's some specific examples that are given. So one of them is about amplified noise, sound, and what the police are typically the first responders for noise complaints, and so you need to be able to hear the noise inside an adjacent home with the windows or doors closed, and be able to understand the lyrics. And
Understand the lyrics, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it's
I can't understand any lyrics personally, but okay. I would hate to just ban speakers altogether. That'd be kind of weird. And a lot of people have speakers in their yard, Sonos and things like that. But I don't know why the rule can be the same as just the, being loud when you don't have a business.
This is for business.
That's my point. I don't know why it should be the same rule. But yeah,
I hear you there. Yeah.
If you're being a dum-dum and you're playing loud music, then you're being a dum-dum and you should get asked to turn it down. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Oh, delivery trucks, we don't ever have those in Lake
We
Oswego.
just solved this problem.
Yeah.
All right, so code enforcement has had issues in the past with large delivery trucks dropping off for home occupations and blocking the street or access to neighboring properties. So the city could place a ban on deliveries from large trucks over a certain size. When asked about this in the survey, several respondents pointed out that it's not unusual for large appliances and furniture to be dropped off in trucks in residential neighborhoods. So the ban would probably be focused on semi-trucks rather than something shorter like a box truck.
I'm guessing the issue with the business is just the frequency. I mean,
Right.
they'd be coming to that house all the time. Yeah.
So my neighbor buys these water containers, big ones, and every week this semi-truck comes and unloads these water containers, and
Not a semi-truck.
it's
A large vehicle.
Well, it is a truck that has a trailer attached to
it has a
it.
trailer.
Yes.
Truck and trailers.
And
that's-
it's not the 2-axle, it's a single axle.
Oh.
And they carry all these water big, so it's heavy and it's large. So I think that I understand we have to have rules, no question. But as I look at every one of these, it becomes situational for me. So if I order something and Amazon decides to send it with a large truck, I have no control over that.
Even if we don't
So
run a
don't buy
business,
it?
we're all getting trucks every day.
Or the number of clients. If I have a meditation company and I'm the only person who is employed, but 6 clients come to my living room and we sit around and meditate, why is that the problem? So, but if it's going to be 6 musicians who show up and do a loud event, that's a different. So any one of these, from my perspective, is a situational, but if you have 2 or 3 of them all at the same time, then I can see that as a problem.
Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, thank you. So delivery trucks.
Thank you. All right, I've got a couple more. So flag lots. Flag lots can have unique issues when it comes to home occupation since they tend to abut more properties, often use shared access lanes. So this was a code enforcement suggestion to place additional limitations on flag lots to address those concerns. And so a couple of ways we thought about maybe doing that, maybe further limiting client visits or outdoor activities on flag lots. We could also go about this differently by placing a limitation on lots that abut more than a certain number of backyards or properties instead of flag lots to avoid impacting flag lots that don't, have that issue, that don't abut a high number of properties. I will say this was kind of an unpopular one in the survey, so.
What's the theory on this? Because they're closer together, or?
Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know if, Bill, you want to?
Sure. So where this came from is just looking back over past complaints about home businesses. Were there any trends or things these properties seem to have in common? And it was very common for them to be on flag lots. Because again, with flag lots, it's typically more challenging to have parking because you're in an access lane. A lot of access lanes are not wide enough for you to have multiple cars put in there. And then the other was because of the configuration of flag lots, you may have 3 backyards that back up to your outdoor space as opposed to typically 1 or 2, because the homes are just closer together. Again, part of the issue currently is that we have this very broad general language, do not change the residential character. So I think some of these issues will be resolved by having specific standards that everyone, it's easy to tell if they're in compliance, they're not in compliance. And by having broad language, neighbors frequently think that their concerns are included in neighborhood character. So they don't like it, so it must not be in the neighborhood, in a typical residential character. So I understand that just signaling out flag lots it's not the best choice, but that's just the history of why it's up there.
Interesting.
I would be careful about putting certain rules on certain types of property only.
Yeah.
Especially for someone who used to own a flag lot in Lake Oswego. Flag lots typically are on the more affordable side of property. And so I'd hate to not discount them, but just treat them differently than everybody else. Just doesn't, gotta be a better solution than that, so.
I just wanted to quickly weigh in on why potentially the flag lot question was less popular than some of the other concepts. I think there was, I think we could have done a little bit more to define what a flag lot is in the survey, and a lot of that sort of, the distaste for this concept might have just been sort of outpouring or a result of not really talking about what a flag lot is in enough sort of detail, and maybe just some confusion around that term. So that might have something to do with this too.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Councilor Afghan.
I was also, again, thinking about situational. If I have a flag lot that's 1 acre versus a flag lot that's 7,000 square feet, there is a big difference there. So all of the things you're saying, they're rules, but I have an uneasy feeling that we're going to be black and white regardless of the situation. And that raises a flag for me. But maybe a balance could be, here are the type of things that we want you to follow. If you don't think they should apply to you, come and talk to us. And similar to the variances that we have, we look at it and we make a judgment. Again, if you have 7 people on my front porch, that's overcrowding. But if you have a front porch that is 10,000 square feet, 7 people you won't even notice them. So how do we make those judgment calls that it's fair based on that situation?
Yeah, I think, you're getting at a question that's kind of fundamental to this project, really, and what we're doing is trying to put on paper and pen in our code, trying to make more specific this existing regulation that is pretty broad and does allow for quite a bit of discretion in terms of enforcement. So we are trying to get towards having that more specific language that we can point to while still, again, balancing the sort of potential for when we write these things down, all of a sudden there are a lot more businesses that are going to know they're out of compliance, potentially neighbors that are knowing that their residents next to them or their neighbors are out of compliance with their home occupation. So there is a potential that just putting it down on paper could have some type of adverse impact, and we want to avoid that as well. So I think that's a difficult part of this project, is trying to balance those two competing factors there.
Thank you. Was this the final slide? Oh.
This is the final concept. I have more slides, but this is the final concept. So finally, code enforcement suggested adding hazardous materials restrictions to the home occupation use standards to make it easier for them to enforce on issues that involve these materials. So this would involve banning materials that are defined as hazardous substances per state code. Not specifically in the home occupation part of the ordinance, so.
They've shut down 3 uranium processing houses.
Is there a difference between hazardous material and hazardous substances?
Hazardous substances is the terminology that the state uses. So when I say hazardous materials, I'm just talking about the concept generally, but hazardous substances is how the state.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would hope that we never have hazardous materials.
So in doing research and outreach for this project, staff have identified a couple of uses that might currently operate as home occupations, but could be more appropriate to regulate as separate uses. So they're both agricultural uses, farm stands and wineries. And they're both uses that could be appropriate in some residential neighborhoods, but might have more impacts than a typical home occupation. For example, they might take up more outdoor space, require later operating hours, or attract more customers than home occupation. So the city could look into whether it would be appropriate to regulate these as permitted or conditional uses in some residential zones, possibly with their own use-specific standards. But since there are some existing businesses with home occupation licenses currently, staff does suggest including this with any update to the home occupation use standards. And so one thing that I'm hoping to get input on, staff is hoping to get input on from the council, is whether to move forward with looking into this further. This wasn't really something that the council specifically directed us to do back in June, so we just wanted to check in and make sure that it was a direction you were comfortable with before we took any further
In regards
action.
to the agricultural uses?
Yes.
If someone, so currently there are some folks with a home, with a business license as a home occupation, and they have a winery or farm stand, and they would be allowed to continue. But new businesses might, if we change it to a conditional use permit or whatnot.
We have 4 people here for this. Jessica New-Monaloo, Community Development Director. With home occupations, the business licenses are, well, any business in Lake Oswego has to get a business license each year. And so technically, we review compliance with the standards at the time that they apply for the business license. So in this case, yes, they could continue operating, but when their business license expires and they have to re-up, then we would have to assure compliance with the standards in effect when they applied.
Is there a scenario where they could be grandfathered in? Could that be part of the code?
We could potentially design it that way if you want us to look into this further. And I think the reason this came up, we didn't expect this to come up, but in doing the research, we said, oh, we weren't aware that these were operating. I'm not sure that they should have been issued home occupations license, if I'm being perfectly honest, but they were. And so the question is, how do we want to treat these? And do you want us to look into that?
So there are commercial wineries, not just the vineyard. There's one.
We have one, yeah, Bob Irvine.
Yeah, Bob's. He actually makes the wine there on the property?
No.
No, he's just growing the grapes. It's just a vineyard. Well,
I don't want to identify anybody in.
Sure. It's a vineyard, though, not a winery. So, okay. Those are two different businesses.
It's a hobby.
Yeah, but we could address it. I mean, one of the ways we could say is, okay, it's an allowed use, and we have these use-specific standards, such as the property has to be a minimum of a certain size, for instance. Maybe there's hours of operations limitations, some other things, but we would not qualify those as home occupations. We would actually put them in our use table as a permitted or conditional use.
Well, I guess you don't grow a vineyard, overnight, and so I'm sensitive, and if literally we're talking about one, I think it doesn't sit well with me to just go in overnight and shut them down.
We agree. That's not our intent here at all to do that. We're trying to find a way to make it fit in. So yeah, we hear what you're saying, and that's not our intent, is to try to shut someone's business down that's operating, I believe, without any complaints either.
Right,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
But going forward, how do you all feel about it?
I don't know. I think it's a non-issue because how many lots can support a winery? But, and it's not exactly like it's mainly a hobby. I would say that's a hobby, not a business, but I know whatever. I just think, I find it hard to make up a bunch of rules for one exception.
Right, exactly.
But that's just my kind of thought. Farm stands, though, I do have a question on, is that a fairly, I know some people grow stuff and then they maybe have out for a couple weeks, or?
Is that what it is, a farm stand?
Yeah, or do we have that many farm stands? And the same thing would be like Christmas trees. I know that there's a couple houses that in the past there's some acreage that they've had Christmas tree, and they're selling it, but it's like a 6-week time frame.
I mean, that could be, I'd have to look at it.
Let me ask the question a different way, because I think I get where you're going. Could you create a standard for a home occ, play along with me, that basically says if someone's growing an agricultural product on their property? The problem is you get into farming, and then you have the Oregon's right to farm laws. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff around farming that's tricky stuff.
We should just bring 4 chairs.
I think the issue would be equitably applying the rules with respect to client visitations and things like that to these businesses that do have, as self-identified, I believe in the survey up to 15 to 20 visitors at any given time at the winery coming to be on that premise. So it's not just the growing of the grapes. I think if it was just the growing of the grapes, we wouldn't have any issues with the compliance on the other standards. So I think it's the issue of, again, getting back to that balance, how do we actually draw a line somewhere and make sure that we're not adversely impacting somebody, because somebody is going to be on the other side of the line almost by definition.
Those other standards are important, and those do need to be universally applied, whatever we come up with. But there's just a use itself, though, like an agricultural use. I think it seems pretty innocuous.
This would not include
growing something.
Well, yeah, except for I do think that there are certain types of agricultural uses that are truly not compatible in a residential area. I mean, if there was a lot of pesticide spraying taking place, for example, you
should identify those things.
Yeah, so
how
I
does
guess
this apply to marijuana?
We don't allow that.
It's prohibited.
Well, I know, but I'm just like,
yeah, no, that's banned, I believe.
That's
in
our other
LO.
private place we did.
So, I mean, I think that your staff are on the right track, to tell you the truth, which is we do have some kind of home occs that don't really, they're square pegs in round holes. And so creating some standards by which we could actually decide whether or not they met certain criteria would be a good thing. And what could do is, essentially take the existing users and not make them pay the fee for the permit that they are going to need. I mean, because they'll need to get a permit, right? At some point.
Do we know of a home-based business winery in city of Lake Oswego? We do? Okay. So if there's only one, we look at that one case and put the boundaries around it.
Well, he means, I think Councilor Afghan means setting the parameters, the permit structure, you know. Base it on however they're doing it without complaints and.
Well, it's a good thing Mr. Olson and everybody else is involved to figure that out.
That's right.
Yeah, I think, so what Michael has sort of proposed, at least just roughly, would be, you know, a sort of a conditional use permit process essentially for these types of businesses. That's something that we do process currently as the planning department, and, you know, would be able to apply to this, you know, fairly easily, as opposed to, you know, sort of within the home occupation standards, it might be a little bit more of a odd fit. So I'm just wondering if there's any feelings about potentially handling this. You know, I guess we would talk about wineries, farm stands, which we've received some, you know, proposals for potential new farm stands that we've had to consider, as well as, I guess, Christmas tree farms would be something we'd want to think about. But thinking about these types of agricultural uses as potentially a use that we would allow on a conditional basis, is that something that we should continue to explore, or is that something that, you know, how do you feel about that?
Would they be able to keep the conditional use permit for, once it's issued, then it's done? So
Yeah, I
it's
think
not- they don't
we
have
would
do
want to
this
work with
every
them
year.
to make sure that, you know, we would really want to ease the onboarding even to the conditional use application in the first place, and try to work with them to make that as easy as possible. And then, yeah, the sort of maintenance of that permit as well, of course.
But they wouldn't have to revisit it every year when they apply for a
Right.
business license. The business license would be just check, do you have a conditional use permit? Yes, great. So they would just get a regular business license, just like any other business in the city.
It's like additional steps. where
Right,
that's
so
what we're
the
asking.
issue is if we're going to adopt standards for home occupations, as Eric pointed out, we don't want to preclude these other businesses that were identified that came up in the survey. We don't want them to now no longer be able to exist because they can't comply with our home occupation standards that apply to 99% of all the other businesses. So if we take them out of home occupation and we create either outright permitted use with use-specific standards or conditional use, there's a couple of ways we could go about it, then that gets them out of having to comply with these home occupation standards, which are going to be a little bit more restrictive, but apply much better to 99% of the home occupation businesses out
That
there.
sounds very smart. Yeah, sounds good to me.
Go that
Councilor
direction.
Redefine said, yeah.
What
yeah.
you said.
Whichever is easiest for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like everyone likes that idea. It's a good one.
Because part of it is we want to encourage people to grow vegetables and stuff and then
Set up a farm
sell them.
stand.
I mean, what about the Kool-Aid stands? How do we?
Yeah, that's
do
the
they have
real
to come
issue.
down and get a permit? Oh, okay.
Well,
We just look the other way.
Footage of the lemonades, yeah.
okay. Was this the last, no, are there additional slides?
I do have some additional slides, and I apologize. But they are related to the survey, so I figured we could just take a couple minutes and it shouldn't take too long. And hopefully this will provide some context to the discussion we're having. So this was a short survey that we sent at the end of February, just open for 3 weeks. It had 4 sections. First asked for some background information about the businesses. Then respondents were asked to rank their level of understanding and ability to comply with existing specific use standards and proposed code concepts. Finally, a general feedback form was provided. So in the background info section, we confirmed that the respondent had a home occupation license in Lake Oswego, asked about the type of business. The answers generally reflected the overall breakdown of active home occupation licenses, with a lot of respondents providing some sort of professional service in a low-impact way. Businesses that might have a bigger impact on the neighborhood were not widely represented in the sample. This partly reflects the overall makeup of home occupations, but it also might be a self-selection bias where businesses that are afraid they might be violating current city policy might not have answered the survey for fear of bringing enforcement action. As I mentioned, we did ask about whether there were any non-personal vehicles parked at the dwelling. About 8% of respondents said they did, but most of the people likely interpreted the question to mean client vehicles rather than commercial vehicles, which is what the question was trying to get at. So staff estimates about 1% of the overall sample indicated they have a commercial vehicle parked on site. We also asked if home occupation owners saved money by operating at home, and if so, how much. Overwhelming majority said they did, with most saving $1,000 per month or more. So that suggests home occupations are important for supporting business enterprise, especially small or newer businesses that might not be able to shoulder the cost of maintaining a brick and mortar location.
Can I ask a question on vehicles? If it's a plumber or an electrician and they have a company van, that's legal to park in their driveway, right? Yeah.
A follow-up question. If I'm a contractor and my wife helps me with the business and my son works with me and we all have company cars, that's 3 company cars, is that going to be a problem?
Well, so the way that enforcement suggested that we approach this was to look only at vehicles that have a logo or some sort of marker that identifies them as a commercial vehicle, to make it easier to identify, rather than try to say, well, you use this 55% of the time as a commercial vehicle, but 45% of the time it's your personal vehicle. So if they had 3 vehicles that had logos on them and we said you can only have 2, then potentially.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to look at that balance again.
Well, and maybe
If you do it in my neighborhood, in the old town, where my lot is very small with the big 3 SUVs, okay. But if you have my previous house in Lake Grove, 15,000 square feet, you could park 22 cars and not even see anything. So again,
square foot house.
lot. So situational, because most people who have home businesses and they're contractors, the family helps and they may all have.
You can park the vehicles on site, that's one thing. You're talking about off-site. Is that what we're talking about, kind of off-site parking when it gets off-site? We're talking on.
No, I don't think it is. It's just the number of vehicles. And you know, I just want to say this was a concept that we came up with. This is why we asked in the survey. You can see a very small percentage of folks actually have more than 1 vehicle. So this could be something that the council, maybe the direction is, I don't think we need to do that. It doesn't seem to be a big problem. I mean, is there, you know, someone could have those big vans, maybe they've got a cleaning business and they park 5 of those big vans and, you know, and they're having people come off site. Well, if they're having people come off site, that's not allowed. You're not supposed to have outside employees. Right. So
we have had complaints, though, Jessica, about this very issue.
We have.
I know that Bill and I have had the opportunity to deal with some angry neighbors about commercial vehicles in residential neighborhoods and the impact on neighbors.
And what is the impact? What is it?
When the hours that they're driven, where they're parked, the impact of lights, especially if they're driven at night. I know we dealt with one that was a home-based ride service, right? Provided ride services, and
on a flag lot, no less.
Yeah, and they were going at all hours of the day and night, and so there may be other ways to tackle it, but I think this is an objective way to tackle it. So I think you could have some discussion. However, I wouldn't discount the fact that for some residents, this is an issue.
That's true.
But it couldn't, maybe, yeah, I see. And is that always been to a certain degree? I mean, or is 1 vehicle, it's the time it's leaving and, you know, there's the headlights and.
I think it was 3 vehicles that were being driven. And because they were being driven for the business, and the business operated at unusual hours.
Yeah, I see.
And this is a place where the vague standard really doesn't help, because one neighbor says it does disrupt the residential character and another neighbor says it doesn't.
Of course.
Were they family members or were they employees? Because again, those are differences.
I don't know that we would consider, if you're working for the business, whether or not you're the son of or the brother of, I don't think we would consider, if you're an employee of the business, you're an employee of the business, no matter what your relationship is to the business owner.
They lived at the dwelling. So, and family is not just by relation, it can be by roommate.
The very first page, we were talking about non-family employees.
That's not allowed.
Specific to the home occupation standards, I guess. So that would be in order to, have a home occupation license, you have to say, all the employees of my business are on site, more or less, but we wouldn't regulate whether or not they were driving a certain number of cars currently, and that's what we would be getting at with this proposal. And so I guess I would also mention that, of course, we're talking about this concern with the cars, and so one way of regulating that would be regulating the number of commercial vehicles and non-personal vehicles, but we've also discussed this hours of operation regulation, which might actually sort of get at the same concerns, maybe, with just a single regulation that might address other concerns that aren't related to cars. So there could be more simplistic ways that aren't sort of directly talking about cars to address this issue.
Right. Yeah, that's a tough one. Okay. Yeah, the vehicles. It's a good, tough. Just don't want to ensnare folks like I do think of the family, folks that just have, and I mean, some things it's like, well, what does it matter? It's a truck or a truck with a logo on it. I don't quite understand the difference. I think it's more to what Ms. Bennett was saying, like, yeah, if it's coming, like, I can see if you're running like a limousine, I guess we don't have limousines anymore, but like that kind of a thing, and you're parking them all there. Well, if you were a limousine, that would be something. And they're parking big extended Escalades or something all over the neighborhood. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously people are going to say it. But I don't know how you get at that. Or, these kind of, it's not just like a regular passenger vehicle that happens to have a logo on it. It's like something else and it's odd hours, and yeah, they're running a party bus business. And they're parking party buses on this, we remove the rocks and then it gets replaced with a party bus.
But you can't have an employee, right? So you can't.
But they're driving it themselves.
Well, you could have one. Oh.
Yeah.
You can have an employee if they live in.
Yeah, so they all reside there and drive the party bus.
But to your point, there are other ways that could potentially be addressing this. The number of cars could more or less be addressed by the number of employees that we allow on site, and it might be unreasonable to think that a single, family of employees could have something like 10 cars on site. But
right.
Yeah, and these are the judgments that we need to try to make. It is hard to account for that contextual element and think about what is going on the road, how many people are parking, how far away, how big of an impact, when we are looking at this more sort of strict sort of rulemaking where we are, putting this down in black and white and saying what the rules are as opposed to this complaint-based squishy language that we currently have.
Are there other cities that have the vehicle thing? Maybe that's a good place to start.
There were a few other cities that I don't think they regulated it the way that, like as far as looking at vehicles that had logos, but there were cities that said you could only have one commercial vehicle or something like that. So it is something that some other cities do.
I think it's a good place to start with the impacts and then work backwards. It's more the impact than than the actual vehicle, or like what. And I guess just using examples that we've had, and also our own common sense to think of what are the real issues here. That's the whole thing in all of this is folks move into a neighborhood expecting a neighborhood, not a commercial area specifically. And sometimes they live into a transition zone where you do expect more deliveries and trucks because that's what you're moving into. So I think that's kind of what all this gets at is you don't expect, your neighbor to be having for-profit parties, every night in the backyard when you move in.
Right.
And you don't expect them to be running a party bus business, out of their house either. So it's all that, trying to establish that line, is tricky, and it's really good that we're going through this exercise. I don't think it's easy, but it does reduce some of the conflicts and add clarity and certainty for folks as well. What can we provide for you all here? Do we need to talk more about the vehicles?
Yeah, so
For the Planning Commission will have great ideas.
I have a little bit more information about the survey, and then can open it up to wider discussion if there is any. So as I mentioned, I asked people to rank their agreement with a couple of statements as it related to some of the existing specific use standards that we have for home occupations. And then I also asked people to do the same thing for the proposed concepts. So the two statements were, I understand what actions I would need to take for my business to comply with this standard. And complying with this requirement is or would be a burden on my business. So looking at some of the existing requirements, and you see subcriterion 1 is circled on the left there. So the two bars represent the average level of agreement. And you see all of them are between 4 and 5. So that's between agree and strongly agree for I understand what actions I would need to take for my business to comply. And so that's maybe a higher level of agreement than we expected for that particular standard. And that might reflect the fact that most home occupation businesses are low impact. A business that involves only a home office with no outside client visitation is generally not testing the limits of neighborhood character or peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. So as a result, even an ill-defined standard might be easy to understand for owners of lower impact businesses. Lower impact businesses are also less likely to have experience dealing with the ins and outs of applying the standard, since this typically arises during the enforcement of activity reported through the existing complaint-based system. Regardless, out of the 4 existing requirements that respondents were asked to rank, subcriterion 1 performed the worst, which indicates this is still the weakest of the existing standards. As far as the level of perceived burden, all of the existing standards scored between strongly disagree and disagree when respondents were asked if complying with the requirement would be a burden to their business. So next section is formatted the same way, asked about the potential concepts for replacing subcriterion 1 with the same prompts to agree or disagree with. So this chart shows the level of agreement for each of the potential concepts when respondents were asked if they understood them and if they would be a burden to their business. All of the concepts but one scored better than subcriterion 1 when it came to understandability, even though the difference was relatively small because people also found subcriterion 1 easy to understand. The level of perceived burden was also similar to the existing requirements with an average score between strongly disagree and disagree for all the concepts but one. The concept that did not perform as well by either measure was the one having to do with flag lots. This ranked as both the most difficult to understand and the most burdensome. In terms of understandability, the survey did not explain what the term flag lot means, which staff acknowledges was an oversight that should have been explained better in the survey. The written responses for this item indicate that at least some of the respondents didn't know what a flag lot is. So that's part of why it ranked as lower on that scale. As far as the concept being more of a burden, this was the only question where respondents were given a not applicable option instead of simply agreeing or disagreeing, since flag lot requirements would only apply to certain properties. About 2/3 of respondents chose the NA option when asked about the level of burden for this concept. And that was an intentional choice by staff to hear more directly from people who have flag lots about the level of perceived burden. Since people who would not be directly impacted could respond with NA instead of choosing an option on the scale, the average was likely pushed up by people who would be impacted. Several of the written comments did indicate concerns about the fairness of treating flag lots differently. At the end of the survey, respondents were given an optional form to provide general feedback about the project. About half of the respondents filled out the form. Their responses ranged in tone, with some being supportive of the project overall, some expressing skepticism, and many warning the city to be careful about imposing new restrictions on businesses without carefully considering the impacts. As mentioned before, here's the tentative schedule for the rest of this project. Staff will bring this item to the Planning Commission for a second work session in a couple of weeks on April 14th. After that, staff will present a draft of code amendments to the Commission at a public hearing on May 28th, and then come to the council with the commission's recommendation on July 1st. So that truly is the end of my slides. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
So would you like some kind of initial parameters then before this goes to the Planning Commission? Is that anything that we're
Just kind of taking the temperature, are there any concepts that you think should be removed or that you aren't sort of enthusiastic about? Or is there anything that should be studied further? Or, are you generally comfortable with the sort of collection that we have here on the list?
Well, colleagues, what do you think about the flag lot got the least warm reception from the community?
How many flag lots do we have in like Oswego, like 2%, 1%?
I don't know.
It's a lot, I think.
It's not a little amount. I mean, I think we have a fair amount, but I honestly don't know.
Less than 10%.
A lot of flag lots. Like Grove has a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, we could look into that. That's something our GIS could probably come up with
Almost
the
all of
number.
Harper
but-
Drive
I
is
guess
flag
my
lots.
point is that I don't think it's a huge number, and it's probably not a huge number of people that are home business with flag lots. So, I mean,
Right.
to Councilor Reps, let's not pick on people. I mean, I don't know. So you have a flag lot. Great. I mean, so you have more challenges than other people, or you get to know your neighbors?
Yeah, I think we're in
I
agreement.
think
on
you
the
guys
flag
are in
lot.
agreement that you don't want to do differential impact for flag lots.
Right.
I
Do the
think
flag
that you're in
lot.
agreement.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that like I said, here, please, Councilor Afghan, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
As I mentioned, situational, it makes a difference. The other thing is I want to make sure that we're not infringing in private property owner rights. I can tell you, you cannot tell me how many people I can have in my house, whether they're clients or they're not clients. That's my house. How many people I want to have in there, that's my business. How it impacts the neighborhood, that's a different topic. So there's some here that I understand where the mindset is, but I don't understand how we're going to be controlling it, or even if we have the rights to control it. So the truck delivery size. And at the same time, I agree, we have to have rules, but we have to think about these kind of things before we come out and say, here are the rules.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Afghan. How do you feel? Councilor Burdick, how do you feel?
Well, I think I'm going to disagree a little bit. I think if I'm having a personal party and I have it once a year, that's one thing. But if you're getting profit, then I think the number and how that impact, if you're having a lot of clients come to your house, especially all at once, I think that does matter and that does have an impact because you have more traffic and so forth. So I do think looking at the number of people coming to the house probably at one time is something to look at, especially when I know like the renting of pools sometimes. If you have you're renting every hour and you have 10, 15 people every hour, that is disruptive to your neighbors. And so then it kind of, your neighbors' rights. So it's a tough balance, but I think we need to, I think as the mayor said, what are the issues we're trying to solve? And then figure out which ones of these actually makes the most sense. I know, I think the conversation on vehicles, I'm like, I think we've got to be really careful because you have some people who are very responsible. Yes, they have logos. They might have 3 trucks, but they're parked on their property. They're not going out at odd hours. It's not an issue. So again, kind of the example that was given, is that more of an hour thing where we need to say that we need to have some hours of operation and look at it from that perspective? So again, I think maybe go back and look at the complaints and see from, do we have some kind of common sense? These types of rules would make sense. But yeah, I do think though, probably restricting how many people are there at once may make sense.
Or the frequency, right? If it
Yeah.
happens every other week, but if it happens every single day of 365 days, that's a different story. Again,
But
impact to the neighborhood.
My hunch is oftentimes if you have it occasionally happen, your neighbors probably aren't going to say anything. If it's happening all the time, it's going to be an issue. So
And I think it would be really difficult to enforce some type of frequency related standard. It's difficult enough to catch one of these complaints, much less, over time, multiple times. Or to actually be there when, the sound or the source of the complaint is actually occurring when code enforcement actually visits, be able to, sort of witness that and, sort of document it accordingly, et cetera. It's difficult. So I think while I appreciate your points, in some ways, the entire purpose of the project is very much at odds with what you're talking about with this context and really wanting to respond to that on a case-by-case basis because we were directed to make these quantifiable standards.
Right.
And that's kind of, again, this is part of the tricky situation where once we go down this road, it is difficult to go back to that sort of, maybe residential character means different things, to different people type of argument in different contexts. So, I think in some ways, maybe that is important for us to hear that maybe this isn't the direction that you're comfortable with going.
And like the logos on the cars, I don't know if you're old enough to know that there are these magnet signs that you put on the cars. So somebody wants to have 6 cars, they solve that problem.
And the other issue that we have with the outdoor use, so currently we have a moratorium, so we don't allow outdoor business activity. And it's going great because that is really easy. You either are or you aren't outside with your business. And so that's been really great for our code enforcement staff to, but we heard from the Neighborhood Chairs Committee, we heard from Planning Commission that, well, maybe that's too restrictive. And it's like, okay, well then it's much harder to kind of try to come up with clear and objective standards to address that. So initially that was going to be staff recommendation is we just keep the moratorium, but that is an option.
I'm for that. When I think of a home-based business, I think of somebody really taking one of their bedrooms or have an office at home and they're sitting there on a computer and they're doing stuff and maybe they're like they cut hair and they have people come in and they do it in their garage or whatever. Financial planners that may have clients or whatever. It's just, that's the home base when I think it's inside of home. I don't like the idea of having outside businesses in a residential area. Even if it's like a yoga class, there's one on Upper that puts out her sign and says yoga, and it's like,
still there.
And I'm
Today.
sorry, but that's a to me,
Every day.
I think there's what I think of home-based businesses
I've
versus
moved it.
commercial businesses, and I think that's a commercial business. And I don't know, maybe that's not the term, but I feel commercial businesses need to be in a commercial business area. And I think residents, when you buy a house, you don't expect to have somebody having swim parties at every hour on the hour. That's just kind of, but then I understand what people are trying to do, but I just, we kind of have a good thing going. I don't think we have too many, maybe we have a lot of complaints, but I don't think so. But this idea that you're trying to build a business with huge traffic in a commercial way.
No, I agree 100%.
that's-
I think it's, and it gets to be to set rules for all these activities. Maybe you could say, well, an outdoor business limited to 2 people, someone wants to cut hair on their back patio or something. But otherwise, this notion to be able to use a home for a commercial party, I think that should be just outright banned. No one needs to be for a for-profit party in their home, whether it's inside or outside. I think it's just an affront to the neighborhood character, like clearly. I don't care how many people it is. So I think those type of things should just be outright banned. And I agree. If it's simple enforcement-wise, just staying away from the outdoor activities, I think that's a good limit because people really don't expect that moving into the neighborhood. And I think there's there are hundreds of at-home businesses here that operate without issue. Hundreds that operate without issue. And I think we're talking about the few that are operating outside the lines of that clearly unacceptable neighborhood activity with amplified sound, lots of people coming over, parking cars all over the place.
And when those happen and we get those complaints, they're exceedingly hard to deal with.
Exactly.
You've sat in on those Martha has sat in on those conversations where they've just elevated and elevated. So they're very difficult to deal with when we do have to deal with enforcement.
Yeah, that's just something to kind of put the survey results into context. Like I'm guessing that most, if not all of the survey respondents have not had to deal with a code enforcement sort of process and deal with the sort of complaints and all that, and getting into the minutia of what is going to be considered an infringement on residential character or, you know, the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. So I think people that do get into those details know a lot about the issues much more than just, you know, a home occupation business that's just trying to be a sort of good neighbor and good sort of resident in the city. So.
And it is, and the enforcement, I mean, even on the people, then you have to show up there. Are you allowed to even go on the property, you know, without a warrant? And then, you know, to count the number of, you know, people swimming in their pool. I mean, yeah, it's just very challenging. So I don't know how everyone feels about, I know we heard Councilor Windland about continuing this moratorium on the outdoor.
I don't know.
Well, you're good.
I look at that as like Airbnb. We have certain rules for that. And if somebody wants to use their pool like the Airbnb concept, if it's, I know it gets crazy because it's like, where do we stop? It can keep going forever. But we're having the dialogue. That's a good thing.
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel like you can't put a shingle out that says that it's a business. I mean, that's just my feeling, you know. I mean, I drove by since a little kid, and it's still up, the taxidermist guy over by, and I wonder if that person is still alive or if he's taxidermied. I mean, I don't know, maybe he just, oh, he did? Well, I mean, boy, talk about a long career. That was like a 60-year career, because I remember when I was like 3. So my point is that I don't necessarily think that we're in an environment that I want advertisement of businesses.
No, and we have sign regulations separate.
Yes, we
do.
Yeah. So.
And, you know, I mean, the rest could apply to indoor businesses, the amplified sound. I mean, I agree with what Councilor Raff, I think, said, you know, that it's kind of having one standard there. I mean, again, that's a difficult, but again, these are the rare, you know, situations. And I think that I can't think of an at-home business that's doing amplified sound that isn't some kind of gathering-based party thing. I mean, you know, and I agree with my colleagues too, like Councilor Verdict on the truck thing. I think that is just, it's so contextual, you know. I mean, yeah, if you have a huge lot and you can fit the trucks on your driveway, I mean, who cares? But yeah, if it's, you know, like in Old Town and you're parking them all over the street every night, well, yeah, people are going to take issue. And it's different again, because someone say, well, I could do that with my personal vehicles. And it's like, yeah, you can, but this is for profit commercial use, and people didn't move in here to live kind of in a light industrial area. Tricky one. Good luck with that one.
So yeah, I guess to try to summarize the direction that we're receiving, I mean, I'm hearing both sides of the argument reflected. So I guess our current approach, minus the flag lot restrictions.
And the outdoor activities.
Trying to find a balance. And so I guess the question would be, yeah, I guess, so are you in consensus that, you know, you would like to potentially see a moratorium on outdoor activities completely within our proposed home occupation standards?
Like Councilor Corrigan had a good question, like something like a daycare, which is, they might be, that's a different thing?
They have to get a business license, but those are regulated by, I don't know if it's state or federal.
The state.
It is a home occupation, but like we can't regulate how many kids, that's regulated by the, yes, they do.
Yeah. Well, could that, how, and I'm also.
But we could accept that. I mean, I think we'd have to, because that would be awful.
It's regulated by the state. It's a home family daycare center.
Or even the.
By the state.
The adult. Foster care.
Yeah,
they don't really have out.
But I mean, that's not, so if there's a way, I think we're not talking about those outdoor activities.
They live there.
I can clarify, I'm sorry. Michael reminded me that the state regulations say that we cannot impose standards on a daycare any more than a regular single-family dwelling. That's the rule.
Okay, good.
So I think we can't say they can't have outdoor
Adult
activities.
foster care too, same thing, I would imagine.
Well, they live there, so they're residents.
Yeah, I don't.
That's right, they are residents.
Yeah. At least for a
That's
while.
great. Okay, so yes, you're hearing that we'd like to continue the moratorium on the outdoor activities. Yeah.
Okay, so that is, so you would like to see that theoretically, because it is likely that the Plan Commission will come up with a different recommendation, but.
That's why we're telling them now.
Okay, all right.
Not like.
I want to get as
done.
clear of direction as
You
possible,
tell
if
them
that's the case.
that door's closed.
Good luck. No.
Okay.
And I think what I'm hearing also is that they want to consider the impacts of commercial vehicle restrictions, not just a sheer limit. So you're going to have to figure that puppy out.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I think has come out of this discussion.
Well, I guess we were talking about the impacts being related to the hours of operation, potentially, I guess. Is there?
Yeah, or
other impacts
neighborhood
there?
parking. I guess that's the other thing I heard, is that what I heard is it depends on how big can you park all the vehicles on your lot or not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So yes,
So it's kind
hours
of
of
a
operation of the
Prohibition on
vehicle
use of the right-of-way for your
for
vehicles, for your
parking
business.
of your home base. Yeah.
Mr. Youngblood has.
Uh-oh, he's like, this is going to be tough to enforce. This is
We
gonna
need a
be
fourth
tough.
chair.
Right, so that's one of the reasons we suggested, or code enforcement suggested about, if we were gonna regulate vehicles, about going by signage on the outside. We do not have the ability to run license plates and talk about ownership or any of that. So we're not gonna be able to tell if it's parked on the street as part of the business or it's parked on site as part of the business. And generally, it's going to be the police department that, again, is responding to some of these complaints if it's after hours. And the officer is going to need a very clear direction on what's a violation, what's not a violation. So, if there was a concern about the aesthetics of signage on vehicles, so a couple of complaints we've had have been like house cleaning businesses. Sure. So they would leave 4 or 5 vehicles, and I don't know if you've seen, but some of the house cleaning companies are very creative with their vehicles. They'll attach things to the top of the cars or different things to really be eye-catching. That was what we were trying to avoid, is there be multiple vehicles with signage. Not that there wouldn't be any, but that there would be, I think what was suggested was 2. But again, if that doesn't work, or if that's not supportable, whatever we come up with, I just want it to be something that can be enforced, or else it creates an expectation for the neighbors that we can't meet. So,
for me, it kind of goes to, can they fit? Maybe it's the logos on, parked on their property versus street after hours or something. I think we could be maybe creative about that, where we're not necessarily getting numbers, but, and I don't want to tag someone because they're coming home for lunch and they have a logo parked. But, I also understand at night, you might not want to have, I'm thinking some big inflatable thing on top of your car, sitting in your neighborhood night after night, or multiple big vans.
Right. Maybe it's if you have more than one work vehicle that they have to be parked on site.
With the logo.
Yeah, with the logo.
Again, we're not going to, if it doesn't have signage on it, we're not going to be able to tell if it's on the street.
We're saying one logoed work, if you have more than one logoed work vehicle, they have to be parked on site.
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
Logo.
Yeah.
Just something to play with.
Yeah. Because it seems like if you can park them on site, you should be able to park cars in your.
Unless you have a flag lot. Just kidding.
And you can park them all the way down the access lane. That's where you put the party bus. Okay.
So I just have admiration for you on figuring this stuff out, because I will say that it's hard, and we understand this because we are in policy all the time, but when you're training officers, and we've got great police officers, they need to have the tools to go out and know what they're supposed to do or what they can do. So I guess that if there are specifics that you want like that, I think that's a fair, I guess, to get input from the planning commission. But in general, if we can do the broad statement of no business in town, or I mean, no.
Yeah, who's the liaison to planning? Who? Bud? Oh, you are. Okay. Yeah. Can you come and communicate this on behalf of us? And then report back to us if things get off the rails. Okay, thank you very much. Great report. Yeah, thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
Thanks. I can't wait for our next study session.
They can.
Fun details to work out.
No. This has been very good. All right, is there any information from, well, Councilor Raff, I'm going to make your night. We had a wonderful visit today from these exchange students from Yoshikawa, and they presented me with these wonderful little sake bottles, and I thought no one needs this more than Councilor Raff. Probably one to Councilor Windland as well. And, well, yes, and for your arm. We'll give one to Councilor Mboop there. Yes. It says it right here. But it was great having our sister city, those students come and visit, and we can't wait to go visit them. So it's only polite, I think, at this juncture. Any other updates? Any updates? No, I know I spent it.
I sent you an email today, and then afterwards, Megan pointed out that I was vague. The Parks Department staff were able to remove the private lake plaques from the steps today. We power washed the steps. We know we're going to have some warm weather this weekend, so we're going to try to get some advisory signage up. It'll be very temporary. It'll be only existing regulations. And you know I've referred to the signs we put in our parks as no fun signs, so there will definitely be no fun signs. There will also be Marine Board regulations and advice about private property. So you will see a temporary sign go up for that. That is in advance, but we're going to have 70-degree temperatures on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So we want to get out there as fast as we can. We will also be having additional park ranger and community service officer patrols of Lower Millennium Park over the weekend to try to keep everybody advised about safe practices.
Thank you.
Yeah, those signs will be going up as well. I don't know if that'll be on the temporary sign, but I'll check on that character. Let me just say something. Let me say something that is general right now. Every year we get some warm weather while the water is still too cold to swim in. So we should have swim at your own risk signs. And I know the sheriff's office does great public service announcements this time of year saying, don't swim yet. It's not warm enough to swim yet, unless you're wearing a full body wetsuit, and then go ahead and swim. Yeah, every year someone dies because they were foolish enough to get hypothermia from water. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure I said that in public. And if you have questions in the next couple of days, please let me know.
And if I could just follow up on what the city manager said, especially for members of the public that may be listening to this, in addition to the education and enforcement that Ms. Bennett said, the city prosecutor and I are also going to be on call this weekend. So people should expect that we're going to be educating, but we're also ready to enforce if we're experiencing, violations of our park rules, drinking, the kind of activities that are not permitted in any of our parks. So we are definitely going to be vigilant and following the direction that council gave us. But I just wanted everybody to know that the prosecutors are on the team.
Notification of littering fines on that sign?
I don't know, but I'll check. I do know, but that would be littering in our park, just so we're clear.
Right,
but
I'm sure there are fines if you got littering.
You've all heard me say that you read the list of things, and so what you don't want to do is overwhelm people, which we do with some of our signs: no smoking, no drinking, no.
What about no murder in the parks?
No that should be
no murder in the parks.
That should be obvious.
Make sure
no off-leash dogs. No, I mean there's just a really long list, and so I think we're going to try to stay focused on the things that we think are most likely to go wrong.
And littering, you don't think is going to go wrong?
I didn't say that.
Well, she just said
I said we're going to try not to overwhelm people because it's the first time they're going to see any signage of this type in this location.
Yeah. That's good. The best thing to combat littering is a trash can.
Middle of the lake?
We have trash cans all over Lower Millennium Plaza Park.
Perfect.
If you somehow miss the trash can, you've deliberately decided not to.
There is
About
good
littering
trash
in the
cans.
lake.
Again,
I'm not talking about littering.
again, the challenge for us, and I think this is the political challenge, is that we can enforce the regulations on our property.
Okay.
So we're going to ask people to be good neighbors, to not trespass on other people's properties, to not engage in unsafe behavior on the lake. However, I can't enforce a no littering regulation on the lake because it's not mine to enforce.
Aware of that.
Yeah, I know you know.
Thank you.
I think you said you will have the community service officer there, ranger there, and
They won't
coming
be
and
there the
going.
whole time.
Yes,
They will be,
understood.
yeah.
But this will be a,
Snipers on the roof.
lessons learned session that we can have. How did it go? Do we need to do anything different? This is our first time.
I just am concerned about the amount of publicity the community's received and then followed immediately by warm weather, so.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for the proactive response. Thank you. Okay, everyone, we are adjourned.
Is that your ride, Masen? Is that your ride?
I gave everyone 20 minutes back. Oh, yeah.